Unfortunately, well, we thought there might be a lot of people, so it's why we're in this room. But I will just tell you, for those of us that are up here, it is extremely awkward to be in the big adult seats, feels like. And it also makes it hard for us to communicate. So if we're a little awkward today, that's why, because we're not used to being in this room. We're going to start with roll call, and then we'll do oral communications. Can I get a show of hands how many people want to speak during oral communications for items not on today's agenda? Okay, great. Okay, Chantal, you want to call the roll?
Thank you. Gregory Braille just walked in. Phil Burton?
Here.
Tony Carrasco? Here. In Young Cho? Megan Kane? Here. Larry Klein? Here. Judy Kleinberg? Here. Patricia Lau? Here. Adina Levin? Nadia Nayak?
Here.
Keith Reckdahl?
Here.
David Shin?
Here.
Carrie Templeton?
Here.
A quorum is present.
Great. So now we'll move on to agenda item number 1, which is public comment. And do we have speakers turned in cards? Or actually, we don't have any speaker cards, but if you could line up at the mic right here, that would be great.
I reminded everyone, though we're in the council chamber, it's still your normal process.
Right, thank you. And you'll have 2 minutes. Chantal, do you have a clock for me as well? I don't know how to work this thing. If it works, let me know. Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Oh.
Oh, that's clever. Wow.
We should have meetings all.
We're learning how to use our monitors up here.
This is how the rich people live.
To the button right next to the red light?
This is the 1% meeting.
We made it the one.
Sorry, we're learning how to use the buttons and be able to see the same screens without all turning our necks, so. And by the way, for those of us up on the dais, there's a little clock down here so we can see what time it is. Do you see it hanging kind of low right there? So, okay, Gary, I think we're ready for you.
Gary Lindgren, in early December, I heard about Jefferson Avenue in Redwood City as an example of an underpass that would be a good example.
Gary, is your mic on?
Yep.
Then move closer.
Yeah.
There you go.
So after Christmas, I took some pictures of this Jefferson Avenue underpass. To get to it, take Middlefield, going towards downtown, and just as you go around the bend in the downtown area, there's a left turn to get onto Jefferson, and this is the underpass. And it was put in like probably 1999, 1998. And so this is you got the sidewalk on the side there. It's out of the street area. There's 2 lanes each way. And the next one. And shows the 2 lanes. And there's buildings on each side, and they're close by. I'm not sure if those might be new buildings that were put after the underpass, but I'm not sure. And now this is 14 feet 6, so we have to go 15 feet 6, I believe. But still a good example. They do the fences there very nicely. Let's get the next one.
Nice and old.
So you got a nice, secure. Raised. Get the next one. Okay, and then up at the top there, that's Middlefield, way up at the top there. And of course, the bridge is where the train goes. Thank you.
Do we have anyone else who wants to speak on an item not on the agenda? Chair, come on up to the microphone, please. And if there's anybody else, if you could line up behind her, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Mickey Winkler, and I'm very glad you finally looked at the traffic impacts, and I hope that you will also look at the construction impacts on Alma and on any place that requires construction. Thank you, because those will be very disruptive to the community.
Okay. Thank you, former mayor. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. My name is Kathy Jordan. I wanted to talk a little bit about the electrification, which, from my perspective, is presented as though it will lead to more frequent Caltrain service, which of course impacts the traffic and impacts potential closure. And that's not exactly accurate, because electrification in and of itself will not actually be the impetus for more frequent Caltrain service. That service is dependent upon federal safety regulations, going beyond the current 79 miles per hour that Caltrain currently runs at. And it's dependent, the impetus is really mainly the separated grade crossings, which are not in place, and which are dependent upon a patchwork of funding, which is not in place. And so the premise, at least, of much of this is about electrification is happening, the train has already left the station, we've got to do something about it, we've got to close Churchill, we've got to do this, it's not actually the case. It's dependent upon grade separations, which are very costly, and approximately $200 million apiece, in which we in the local community may be asked to finance in some joint sharing of funding with other entities. So I wanted to bring that up again and raise the fact that the whole premise of this, which has been sort of advertised, I think, is not completely accurate. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other speakers?
Rob Levitsky on Emerson Street. Following up what she said, electrification does not necessarily increase activity on the rails. You might go from 5 trains an hour in each direction to 6. We know that that still leaves 53 or 51 minutes of gates up time. So at Churchill, there's no reason to particularly close it. How the alternatives will be evaluated based on, quote, facilitate movement across the corridor for all modes of transportation. Now, if you want to facilitate movement, you don't close a crossing that gives you 10,000 crossings a day, because you would dump those, we would guess, 5,000 north to Embarcadero and 5,000 south to Oregon. No mitigation or traffic study shows that you can just swallow those 5,000 cars. It's ridiculous. Embarcadero is currently serviceable, although sometimes you have to wait a little bit in the morning and in the evening. The only time it really backs up is when there's a Stanford game, and there's about 6 or 7 of them every year. And then when that happens, it's stopped for many signals streets back. What we don't want is you to dump all those cars every day from Churchill and make it like Stanford football game every single day, because that's probably what you're facing. Right, Larry? Possibly. Anyway, the other condition you're supposed to look at is reduced delay and congestion for automobile traffic at rail crossings. So again, we have a good crossing at Embarcadero, and you won't be reducing delay, you'll be increasing delay by closing Churchill and forcing 5,000 cars north and 5,000 cars south. And as the last speaker just said, electrification doesn't really increase train traffic significantly. And of course, during the evening hours or midday hours, there's so few trains that it's no reason at all to close Churchill.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I don't see anybody else for public comment, so we will move on to item number 3, which is a review of the traffic study. And we have with us today Gary Black from Hexagon, and Peter Stefano from AECOM, and Philip Cami, who just joined us. And so, Gary, you're going to lead the presentation, I understand?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, I've got to get this on.
And just to be sure, for the audience, you guys can grab a packet in the back, so you will have a paper copy of the presentation in case you don't know.
Okay. There we go. The purpose of the presentation is to answer a lot of questions that came in on the traffic study that is posted online. And Chantel summarized all those traffic questions for us that kind of informed this presentation. So hopefully throughout the presentation, we'll address the questions that have come up that have been submitted to the city that Chantel has.
Gary, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second,
Yeah.
so I can just explain to everyone how this is going to work, so everyone understands what the process will be.
Okay.
So Gary is here as he just told you, and as the slide says, ex-CAP members and members of the public have turned in questions about the traffic study. So his presentation is going to do his best to answer all of the questions that were received. I'm sure that when we hear the material today, there may be further questions. So we will be taking public comment after the presentation. But I did want to make sure that people know that it's possible that he will come back at some future point if there are other future questions that need to be answered, right? And so I don't want everyone to feel like this is the be-all, end-all presentation, and if you don't hear Gary address a specific question that you sent in, it doesn't mean that that's being ignored. However, during public comment, if there's something that you really feel is still outstanding that you feel is very salient, please feel free to let us know. But this is not the only moment, but it is a good moment to get your questions answered. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone in the audience understood how this is going to go, and don't expect that Gary will answer everything necessarily. So go ahead, Gary. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I'm very happy to come back.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of word slides in here that I'm not going to spend too much time on. They're in this presentation because the presentation is going to be online, so people that aren't here to actually listen could look at the presentation and hopefully figure out what we're talking about by reading the word slides. Just some terminology. There was questions about what is VISM, and thanks to Chantal for looking this up. It's actually a German acronym. The software was developed in Germany. It's a traffic simulation model, takes into account roadway geometrics, traffic volume, signal timing, behavior characteristics of drivers. Are they aggressive drivers? Are they timid drivers, or a mix? It's calibrated to existing conditions by observation to adjust all these factors so that the simulation replicates what's actually happening on the street. That simulation was done for Alma between Lincoln and Churchill, which we'll talk about a little more, why we did that simulation and what we're actually looking at. And the simulation does calculate the intersection delays during the peak hours. The simulation was done for the peak hours, which are, commute hours in the morning and the afternoon. For the future, there's an existing and also a 2030 analysis. So the 2030 analysis used the City of Palo Alto travel demand model, which looks at growth of land use in the city and around the city and predicts traffic volume on various streets. Based on, as it says, based on population and employment changes. It includes known growth plus projections even beyond known growth. In this case, it includes the Castellea School, Stanford General Use Permit, which may or may not go forward, but there is still some assumption about growth at Stanford. There was a question, but why 2030? Why not some other year? 2030 is a year of your general plan. That's the horizon year of your general plan. So that forecasting was already done for your general plan. So that was something that was kind of available off the shelf. There's a question, what does the word mitigation mean? In this case, we're talking about changes to the street system to provide additional capacity to accommodate traffic that would be diverted if we close Churchill. Oops, pushing the wrong button. Again, here's a slide for people that are reading at home. So to get in some of the details, as I think you all know, there's a traffic study that was quite extensive that was done by TJKM. And we did a peer review of that study, and our study uses a lot of the data from that study. And that's also available on the city website. Our study and the TJKM study is available if you really want to get lost in details. Questions come up about the traffic counts. Did we do enough traffic counts? Did we do enough days? Do we need more traffic counts to inform our decisions? We don't believe that we need more traffic counts. This table just shows a comparison of some of the traffic counts that are available on Churchill at the railroad crossing. Counts done for this Stanford EIR in 2016, the 2018 counts that were done by TJKM, some 2019 counts that we did. Hexagon did, admittedly, when schools were not in session, so that we expect that to be a little lower. But the numbers are pretty consistent. So we're confident that we have good enough numbers to do all of our analysis, so we don't need to collect more data about that. So here's some conclusions. The daily traffic number, what I showed you before were peak hour numbers. The daily crossing is 9,800 approximately. You'll hear that number talked about quite a bit, and that's what our count showed. It also exactly matches the Caltrain business plan, which was another question that came in. Is this consistent? And yes, it is. They have the
Can you
same-
clarify one thing for us?
Yes.
What's your definition of peak hour?
Peak hour is the highest hour.
Okay.
So usually we talk about a morning peak hour, which would be the highest hour during the morning commute, and then afternoon peak hour, the highest hour in the afternoon commute, but it's 1 hour.
Okay.
It's 1 hour.
Based on your measurement?
Based on our measurement, the highest hour whenever that occurs.
Do you happen to know, Gary? Go ahead.
I just have a question. Is it seasonal? And again, you mentioned it wasn't during a school period.
We try not to count during unusual times like around Christmas or during the summer when schools are not in session. So usually traffic studies are looked at, during what we call typical. We use the word typical. We're looking for typical conditions, not something that's unusually low or unusually high. So usually counts are done sometime between September and June. That's our usual count period because we can be sure that the schools are in session, people aren't on vacation so much. We avoid holidays, holiday weeks, and things like that. So this shows the results of the simulation that we did at Churchill at the crossing to see the queue lengths that are occurring today and that would occur with the increase in the Caltrain service based on the business plan. And that this analysis is based on 9 trains per hour for existing conditions and 12 trains per hour with the Caltrain business plan. And I think earlier there's been some statements about, this will be gridlocked and it'll be impossible to clear with the Caltrain business plan. That's not what we found. The queues would clear, but you can see that they're very long with the Caltrain business plan. The northbound left turn from Alma onto Churchill would take, 4 or 5 cycles to clear. Each cycle is about 2 minutes, so that's quite a bit that's like a 10-minute wait. It's quite a long wait there, but eventually it would clear in an hour. I mean, it wouldn't take an hour, but I mean, within the peak hour, you wouldn't get a queue that was just continuous. We have the same thing for the PM. And again, this is based on existing. If we were to show 2030, it would look different. But and here with the increase in the Caltrain service, now the PMQ would go out to El Camino. I think I've heard some anecdotally that maybe it does now occasionally, but we didn't see it go all the way that far when we were out there. But it goes pretty far. So that's anyway. There, like I said, 9 trains per hour for existing, 12 trains per hour for the business plan.
A quick question, if I may?
Yeah.
Over here.
Sorry.
So when you are traveling east or west, and there is pedestrian or bike traffic also traveling east or west, and you wish to take a left, let's say you're traveling, I'm looking at your PM, let's say, for example, you're leaving Stanford, or wherever you're leaving, and you're heading towards Alma, but you want to take a left turn, and there are bikes or pedestrians. Did you account for being, in other words, I see where the, 3 to 5 cycles for regular traffic to get through the light, but did you also account for backup, for waiting for pedestrians and bikes so that you could actually move your car into the intersection and take a left or a right, depending on what you want to do?
Yes, the simulation includes pedestrians and bikes based on the counts that we did out there of pedestrians and bikes and at what times they're crossing the street. And so, these are kind of averages throughout the hour. It doesn't mean that, might have the occasional cycle where you'd have to wait more than 3 cycles, for example. We also have the simulation software provides the opportunity to provide this thing called animation, so you can look on the computer and see cars go up and down the street and see people walk across the street and see bicycles go across the street. So that's
Okay, so just to follow up, if I may?
Yeah.
And so since you didn't pick a school hour, you said you didn't want to do it, you wanted something that was typical but not a school hour? Is that what you said?
No, I misspoke.
pick a school
I misspoke.
hour.
Yes, we did pick a school
You
hour.
did pick a school hour?
Yes.
Sorry, I think
Okay.
what he said is they picked when school is in session, different than when peak hour is for cars.
Well, I should point out that the peak hour for cars and for the school coincide in the morning, but they do not coincide in the
night.
afternoon.
Yeah.
The school lets out before what we call the traffic peak hour. So this is the traffic peak hour, because we actually found that was worse than the school peak hour in the afternoon because of the traffic. Even though there's not, during this time period, which is roughly 5 to 6, there's hardly any bicycles and pedestrians out there at that time. But it was still, overall, that was higher.
So, at Churchill, going to east-west, there is no straight going in the morning.
Right.
Do you consider that?
Yes, we
Okay.
did. For 45 minutes, I think.
Yeah,
It's
in the morning.
prohibited.
During the peak hours.
Yeah, I think it's 8 to 8:45. Yeah.
Gary, these are all great numbers, and I appreciate your work. Is there any work in your research in your field which would show when do human beings who are caught in these queues for 4 or 5 cycles begin absolutely to go out of their minds?
Yes.
An animation.
Yes. That's a good question. Based on our observations, people start to go out of their minds if they have to wait more than 15 minutes. And what I mean by go out of their minds, they're not willing to wait that long, and so they'll go somewhere else. You particularly see that at meters, on-ramp meters for the freeway. You won't see queues longer than 20 minutes or even longer than 15 minutes because people they're not willing to put up with it, and they're going to do something else to avoid it.
So since your diagrams don't show a wait of more than 5 cycles, so 10 minutes, then presumably if we did nothing, people would not be complaining?
Oh, they would. I'm sure they're complaining now. But what I'm talking about is they would not be willing to wait, and instead they would go somewhere else. That's what I'm talking about as the threshold.
So
The
they'd complain-
threshold, the threshold for
Until
complaining.
they do
is
nothing,
different.
they'd complain, but they wouldn't...
They would complain, but they would put up with it, I guess. In my experience.
Good, that's precisely
Okay.
what I was asking. Thanks.
Sorry.
Gary, when you say that the future assumes 12 trains, are you talking about 2030, and are you talking about electrification of the
No,
business
we're
plan?
just talking about existing volumes plus the Caltrain business plan. We didn't bring the graphics to show you the 2030 here, but
Sorry, I mean on the, existing assumes 9 trains per hour, future assumes 12 trains per hour. Is that just electrification? or
Yes.
Okay.
yes. Okay, so we talked about what the traffic forecasts include, the 2030 general plan, Stanford and Castellea, and the Caltrain service increase that we just talked about. Wow, this one's really hard to see. Sorry about that. So there were a lot of questions about the reassignment. What we mean by reassignment is that the pattern of traffic that's using Churchill now, if Churchill's closed, they have to go somewhere else. So somehow or other, we have to estimate where they are going to go. How are we going to do that? Well, we need to know how where they're coming from now. And so where they're coming from now, TJKM determined by looking at what's called streetlight data, that's published data that you can actually purchase from the Streetlight is the name of a company, and you can purchase the data from Streetlight. And what that data is tracking cell phones. So whenever you're driving around, somebody is tracking where you're going, believe it or not. And it's anonymized, so I don't know anything about particular people or particular phones, but it's all aggregated. And so this can be used to determine traffic patterns, where people start, where they end up, and what route they take. And so what they did is look at the traffic that's crossing the railroad tracks and figuring out where that traffic came from. And then the reassignment was done by hand using the shortest path. And so in the traffic study itself, these numbers can be read, but let me just summarize it to say, let's see, where's my pointer? So if you look right here, this is going, towards the school. There's traffic that's coming from the south and turning left. There's traffic coming from the north and turning right. And then there's traffic that's coming out of the neighborhood and going straight across.
I think people might, okay, I don't had to work to understand what you're showing here. Is this showing what would happen if the Churchill intersection were closed?
The crossing.
The crossing were
Yes,
closed.
the crossing.
And the red arrows show cars that are no longer going somewhere, and the
Yes.
green arrows show new cars that are going somewhere.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
I just wanted to ask that clarifying question because
Thank you.
it took a
And then
while to figure that out. Thank
To
you.
add to that, the numbers the first number is the morning, and the second number that's in parentheses is in the afternoon.
That is correct.
Oh. And then the two sides is eastbound trips and westbound trips.
And
Per hour, per day?
At peak hour.
Just
peak hour.
just
The peak hours that we've been talking about, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon. So that's the actual volume of traffic that's making that particular movement, and the red, that would go away, and the green is where the traffic would be added. And we got a lot of questions about, well, how did you figure this out? And I want to emphasize this was done what I call by hand, with assumptions by traffic people like myself and others to assign traffic to the shortest path. So just as an example, so the traffic that's coming from the south and turning left, all that traffic was reassigned to Oregon Expressway Page Mill. Now, some people ask, well, couldn't it still, use Embarcadero, just go past Churchill and all the way up and use Embarcadero? Yes, it could. And same thing with the traffic going south. We assigned that all the traffic coming from the north that was heading south was reassigned to Embarcadero. It could have been assigned to go down to Page Mill and use Page Mill instead. So I want to be very clear about how the reassignment was done. And then there was a lot of questions, well, how do you know that this is correct? Well, I can't foretell the future. All I can tell you is this is how it was done. And I think if I handed all of you a piece of paper and said, here's the traffic, reassign it, you might come up with 12 or 13 different answers. Okay. So I just want to point that out. I'm explaining the logic that was used. And
Gary, question. When you say shortest path, do you mean distance or shortest time?
Distance.
Distance.
Yeah.
So that doesn't take into account traffic speeds on different roads?
No, but I will say that the traffic speeds on these different roads, it's not that different because we're not talking about expressways or freeways or anything. So they're all local streets. Yeah.
And the VISIM model doesn't do this?
No.
Okay.
No. If you think about it, there's really no way to do this other than just logic. I mean, we're getting off in the weeds, so let me just say, this is how it was done. And there aren't any models that I can invoke that would do this for us, other than the city's travel demand forecasting model, but it's not nearly detailed enough to handle a small area like this.
Gary?
You go first.
Gary, a couple of residents brought up this issue that Caltrain's business plan wouldn't allow them to go beyond 6 or 7 trains per hour before grade separation. And wondering if your model is using 6 trains an hour or 7 trains an hour or 12?
It's using 6 trains an hour.
I see.
I mean, 6 trains per direction in an hour, 12 trains total.
And does that allow Caltrain to run 12 trains an hour without grade separations?
Well, it's their business plan, so that's what we used.
So they will.
Those numbers come from Caltrain. Yeah.
Could you help us put some of these numbers in perspective? If I look, for instance, on the eastbound trips, we're adding at afternoon rush hour 267 cars during the peak hour to, looks like, El Camino in Oregon. How many cars, what percentage increase are we talking about at these intersections?
That's a very good question, and I'm just going to have to give you an estimate. Did you ask for El Camino in Embarcadero?
As an example, El Camino and Embarcadero would be a great example, sure.
So I would estimate that El Camino Embarcadero probably has 3,500 cars going through it in an hour.
In all directions?
Yeah, if you add up all the directions. So it's, you know, in our business, just to put it in perspective for everyone, in our business, 200 cars is a lot of cars.
Okay.
You know, 50 cars is not anything to worry about. So that's kind of, a lot of things, believe it or not, use a cutoff of 50. If it's less than 50, you don't even need to do any analysis because it's not going to make any difference. Just to put it in some perspective.
And 200, like 4 cars a minute, or a little more, yeah.
So let's continue on here. Let's see, make sure I hit all these points. Based on shortest path, to and from the north assigned to Embarcadero, to and from the south to patient. And then, the volumes that were just going straight across from the neighborhood, those were split between Embarcadero and Page Mill, but it was biased a little more towards Embarcadero because Embarcadero is a lot closer to Churchill than Page Mill is. Okay. Then we took that traffic that you just saw in the reassignment, and though I will go back and say, just in the defense of this analysis, this reassigned traffic is got to go somewhere. We're not just going to assume it's going to disappear. So if we didn't assign it like this, we would assign it somewhere else and it would show up. It's not just going to disappear. So we have to accommodate it. Well, that was the task that we were given, was to see if we can accommodate this traffic. Not ignore it, but can we do something to accommodate it? This diagram shows this from the TJKM report, the intersections that were defined as having impacts as a result of having this traffic added. And there's a definition of what constitutes an impact, which we can go into in detail, but
where does that definition come from?
It's the City of Palo Alto definition of significant impacts that are used in environmental documents. So, I mean, if you want to hear what it is, it's adding 4 seconds of delay to a signalized intersection, to an unsignalized intersection that's causing the intersection to meet a signal warrant. And I think there's also a delay increase at the unsignalized intersection threshold. So the intersections where there would be impacts are El Camino and Embarcadero, El Camino and Page Mill, Alma, kind of the Alma and Page Mill interchange, which is 2 stop sign intersections where the ramps meet. And then I will call up the 3 stop sign intersections along Alma that provide the connections between Embarcadero and Alma. They also identified 2 other intersections, which we have X's on, which are Embarcadero and Calpert, and Embarcadero and Middlefield, which we don't, Hexagon did not agree with the analysis that was done there. I think that was they arbitrarily reassigned traffic to those 2 intersections, and they could have picked any of 10 intersections. So anyway. Here we go. It's defined as 4 seconds delay. Improvements were studied for the 7 intersections that you saw circled. We disagree with TJ Kim about those other 2. So now I'm going to go over the mitigation measures that were developed or suggested. This is El Camino and Embarcadero, which is basically adding a left turn lane So there's 2 left turn lanes to go from Embarcadero to El Camino. There's a lot of questions about this intersection and what you could do about this intersection. Is there anything else you could do at this intersection? And yes, there are a lot of things that you could do at this intersection. There's a lot of space out there on El Camino. You could add, somebody asked about, well, let's have a second southbound left turn lane. Well, you could add it. There's room for it, I mean, if you want it. And what about getting rid of the pork chop islands and squaring off the corners a little bit, increase the pedestrian and not, that's usually considered to increase pedestrian safety so they don't get exposure to free right turns. So that's another thing that could be done. The question about whether this design would be compatible with the plan to add cycle tracks to Embarcadero, and it is compatible with that, though they're not shown on this diagram. I know the general plan, because we did the general plan traffic study, talked about having queue jump lanes for buses at this intersection, which is another thing you could do. So this one definitely has possibilities. And the other thing to say is that, what?
What is the right-of-way width on Embarcadero at this point?
At Embarcadero?
Yeah. the lanes that
I
you're showing.
don't recall, but if you look at the diagram, you can see that additional right-of-way is necessary. Because if you compare the red line to the, let me get my little pointer here. If you compare this line to the current edge of the street, the edge of the street's there, and this line is over here, that's additional right-of-way required out of the Palo Alto High School.
Okay, so there would be some acquisition there.
Acquisition, yes. But I should say that the cycle track project already assumed that there would be acquisition of right-of-way from the high school in order to do that project. So this
if
one
we did
would,
this and the cycle track, we'd have additional
you'd have
acquisition.
some more right-of-way that was needed from the high school, but it's all there. The setbacks are very substantial on that side.
Okay, thank you.
So you've chosen as mitigation, in the middle 2 lanes are southbound lanes to go onto El Camino. Is that right? They look like they're going south. Am I reading this right? You look like you're the left turn lanes.
Yeah, they turn left. They turn left to go south on El Camino.
So my
yeah.
question is, you've got one right turn lane that's also a straight ahead lane, and then one straight ahead lane into Stanford.
Right.
And these 2 that don't go into Stanford, they go
Right.
south. Why did you choose 2 to go south and 2 to go into Stanford? And so my question would be, what's the reasoning to not have more flow into Stanford? Why so much flow south on El Camino? Did the traffic study show that lots of people go over to that intersection and turn south on El Camino?
Yes. The left turn from Embarcadero to El Camino is very high. I don't have the number in front of me, but
that's the reason.
And with this, remember, this is with closing Churchill, so you're going to get more traffic that makes that left turn because it can't get to El Camino on Churchill anymore. It has to use Embarcadero to get to El Camino.
And that's left turn traffic off of Churchill that you're accommodating now to come left on Embarcadero.
Well, it could be through traffic off Churchill, but yes.
Okay.
Well, it's probably more like right turn traffic from Alma to Churchill that wants to get out to El Camino.
Yeah, so yeah.
Instead, it would need to get on Embarcadero to get out to El Camino. And it wants to go south on El Camino, so it makes the left turn. It's already a very high volume movement, that southbound left turn. And in fact, it's been studied before to do this improvement, irrespective of closing Churchill, just because of the volume of left turns there and trying to kind of clear the backups on Embarcadero. Since we're on Embarcadero, we've got a lot of other questions about Embarcadero and how it flows and where it backs up. And what about the intersection of Town and Country and the high school driveway? And what about that intersection? And based on our studies and observations, that intersection is not the problem. El Camino is the problem. And if you were to take away El Camino, that intersection of the high school driveway and Town and Country would work just fine. But traffic is backing up from El Camino through that intersection and beyond that intersection. So it's a little deceiving if you're a driver and you come and you see maybe a red light and you at the driveway, you're going towards El Camino, you see a red light at that driveway, and you think, oh, this, stupid red light. If this were green, I wouldn't be stopped. No, if it were green, you'd still be stopped because it's backing up from El Camino. And so if you can make some improvements at El Camino, then that'll basically go downstream or upstream to the intersections before that. So we got a lot of questions about that. And we don't believe that intersection is really the problem. We think El Camino is the problem.
Is the El Camino intersection and the town and country light, are the signals currently synchronized in any way?
I'm told they are. And when I've been out to look at it, it seemed like sometimes they weren't, sometimes they weren't. But anyway, that's what I'm told. I'm told they're synchronized. Let's make sure I got all these cycle tracks. There's other things you can do. Yep, we got all that. This one, we received absolutely no comments about this, which is to put signals in for the ramps from Alma to Oregon Expressway. Those two intersections meet signal warrants, so this would be not a super controversial, I don't think. Sorry,
Good.
go ahead.
Okay, so is this a safety issue or is this a traffic flow issue?
Traffic flow issue.
Is that the cars that are trying to get on and off Alma at this point can't cross the other lanes of traffic?
Right, correct.
And so now you'd be adding delays in this. Would this affect the throughput of Alma? Would you create backups by introducing lights here?
Well, anytime you put a light where there isn't one, and then have it turn red every once in a while, then you're going to delay the traffic on Alma. But it's a trade-off to allow the ramps to actually flow. And so, and you also have left turns there that, can have some difficulty because of the lack of, continuous flow on Alma. But you are right, that you would increase delay on Alma if there are signals there.
And I'm not sure how to quantify this, but overall, would you say that this would be a healthy intersection? You'd be adding delays, but you'd be improving turns. Overall, do you think that's a good trade?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the turning movements on Oregon and in Alma looks like it adds 189 cars per hour at peak hour, and I bet that intersection has a lot less traffic than Embarcadero. So proportionately, that's a lot of cars. And I'm wondering, the plans we saw earlier from the city staff for intersection improvements to mitigate all of this didn't say anything about that particular intersection. So do we think we might, as a result of this, go back and change those proposals? I don't know who would do that.
Not sure I understand.
There's a fact sheet out there that says if we close Churchill, we're going to make improvements at A, B, and C. And this would be D. This is an intersection that's not in that proposal. So perhaps we would recommend at some point that if we go down this road, that this intersection be included in that plan.
That's our recommendation as
thanks.
Consultants to you.
I have a question about how you chose to handle the traffic with a signal. Did you consider any other ways of maintaining traffic flow?
Well, the standard approach is to put a signal there. The option is to put a roundabout there. Frankly, we did not look at whether it's big enough. There's enough room out there to fit a roundabout, but that's always an option when considering a traffic signal.
Okay, thank you.
So the only thing sorry, go ahead, Megan.
I had a quick question about the, trying to describe turning movements here is challenging, but imagine you're heading eastbound on Oregon Expressway and you're making a right to go south up that skinny ramp onto Alma. Does that turning movement, is that controlled by the light, or does that sort of skip the light intersection? And
No.
if it doesn't, does it back up Oregon Expressway for light queuing?
Well, it would back, No, that's not controlled by a signal, and it would back up less with a signal or a roundabout than it would back up leaving it as a stop sign. So that's the idea.
Okay. Currently, there's technically a yield, but no one ever yields. They just go, and you're in that lane, and you're sort of going straight, and you're like, all right, I'll just sort of slot myself in there. So I think considering that, making sure that turning movement works well would be something I would want to look into.
All right.
The question I had is that on the top left of the graphic, you have one lane, which are the folks taking the Alma underpass to get down to Cal Ave. And the way the signal is, cars are stopping just past the ramp that allows people to go down. And so the question is, by stopping cars there, you're in some ways impeding the constant flow of those people that from the right lane are going under the underpass. And did you?
Well, it's not shown very well here, but there is it's intended to show a right turn slip lane there that bypasses the signal.
Right, but by the time you stack 3 cars, you've now blocked the slip lane, right? So the question is, I mean, I can't tell from the graphic necessarily because I'm not good
Well, it'd be more like 8 or 10 cars, but eventually, if the queue was long enough, you would block that slip lane, yeah.
Okay, and is there potential for, I don't know how many, to Greg's point, I don't think we saw any traffic data on these intersections, so we haven't seen any numbers. Same for the Embarcadero El Camino intersection. The numbers that we got didn't go so far, so we couldn't see what your traffic counts are, so it would be helpful to understand, quantify how many people are making that constant right turn, and could that cause issues or not?
Okay, those are good comments, and we can get back to you with some of those numbers. I mean, they're buried in there, but I'm not expecting you guys to look them up. I'll look them up for you. So, so this is El Camino and Page Mill, where the improvement is to add a right turn lane, which is already planned, as far as I know. I'm not sure when that's going to get done. So let's move on.
Where does the...
Oh, sorry, you want to go?
Yeah, I just had a quick question, because the right-hand turn lane sort of takes the sidewalk, so I'm wondering, whose land is that? Where is that coming
There's
from,
a development proposal on that corner, and they would be conditioned to do this improvement that you see on the screen here. And it would require some right-of-way offer, or shall we say.
Yeah, Gary?
Yeah.
Right around this intersection, there are 2 office buildings under construction. I don't know the total square footage or anything like that. Is there any way to factor in the demand increase because of these new offices?
Yes. Yeah, that's included in the 2030 forecast. Those new offices are,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
So we should spend some time on this intersection, because this is the one where we got hundreds of comments. So this is Alma and Embarcadero.
Gary, hold on one second. Got Larry.
But before you go off Alma and before you get off Oregon and El Camino, go back to that one. You said that it'll be, and it's obvious that there'll be some taking of property for the right turn lane. That property is presently under construction. It's just started in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
So my question is there anything that's going on right now with that development proposal, which is under construction, that would inhibit that?
No, my understanding is that this will be built in conjunction with that project that's under construction.
Okay. Phil, do you know, is the city taking it? You don't know?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. That's a planning department.
Yeah.
Well, I have the floor. There's another question I have, which should have been asked much earlier. It's on your assumptions. For 2030, you've only gone through your math, assuming that there'd be 6 trains in each direction per hour. The business plan, as I recall it, of Caltrain, does assume that sooner or later there'll be at least 7 trains in each direction per hour. Is there any easy metric that we can use to add to the impact without going through a big study? In other words, if there's 100 cars per hour extra in some direction or other with 6 trains per hour, what do we go to when we go from 100 to 140? Is it straight line or does it become geometric?
Well, we reassign the traffic that's there. So it's irrespective of how many trains are going through. But what would change would be the queuing analysis that we showed you before.
Yeah, I understand.
And since once we set up the model, it's not that hard to query it with different assumptions. So it would not be that hard to go back and rerun the model with 7 trains instead of 6. I will say that it's nonlinear though, because so you can't just say, well, it's 18% more trains, so the queue is going to get 18% longer. It's kind of a geometric progression, and so all of a sudden, you could, it can leap way up substantially. So, but if the, committee wants us to check it with 7 trains, in each direction, we could do that.
Well, I would, but I can't speak for anybody else. I'd be interested in seeing that because 2030 seems like I understand why you had to use 2030, but the world's not coming to the end at 2030, at least I hope not.
Well, if I can just point of clarification for everybody, because it is a little confusing for those not following along quite as much. So there's 2 ways to refer to the number of trains that we currently have at peak hour. There's per direction, and then there's total. So currently we have 5 trains in each direction, which means we have 10 trains total. That, as an estimate, happens between, for example, 5 and 6 p.m. That's why you can't get across town at that time. After electrification, Caltrain is moving from 10 trains total an hour to 12 trains total an hour. That's the 6 in each direction. But the Caltrain business plan talks about adding future trains, and the potential is that they might go up to 20 trains an hour, and that is because it includes assumptions about Caltrain trains and high-speed rail trains, which we could debate in a whole other meeting, but that is the general number. So we did have a public speaker before who said, oh, well, Caltrain doesn't have permission to go up higher. They have permission to go up to 12 trains an hour, no problem. There is some number between 12 trains an hour and 20 trains an hour that require all grade separations to be completed. And we will be having Sebastian Petty from Caltrain come and speak at some point, and he, I'm sure, will address this. But for those of you in the audience trying to understand, sometimes we talk about 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 11 or 12. That's what that refers to. So sorry to interrupt, but I thought that was helpful.
Okay, moving on. Or more questions?
Well, I'm still concerned about it because I don't think things are quite as simple as that. First of all, laws can change, or the rules under which Caltrain is operating. And it seems like a pretty easy change for them to go from 12 to 14 if the traffic is justified. And I think we just have to know what the result would be when you're considering whether to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, if the number we were really dealing with in 2035 is 14 trains an hour rather than 12. I don't want to see us go to a lot of extra work, but if you have a simple calculation, I would really like to see it. Just for example, on the most extreme item you have so far, it shows the 5-cycle delay at Alma and Churchill. So under 7 rather than 6, what would that 5-cycle delay go to? Would it go to 6, 7, 8 cycles? And that's what I would be interested in knowing.
And yes, thank you, we can do that. And it's not that big a deal.
And I would also make the point that, so you've only looked at the unclearable queues at Churchill, but at some point when you're running that many trains, you will also have delays at other crossings that aren't currently separated that will cause network delays. And so the question becomes, for example, if Palo Alto Avenue is not yet grade separated and now you can't get through because there's so many trains, some subset of the traffic will start to take University, but University is already bad, and then more of them will travel down to Embarcadero. So that's my understanding, is not possible to model necessarily the way the system is set up, correct? You can only look at one intersection, but it's hard for you to model multiple intersections going through multiple train.
No, we could use the city's travel demand forecasting model to kind of look at the citywide effects of more train interruptions, which would start to reassign traffic, because if, let's say you had to wait 15 minutes at Churchill to cross the tracks, or would traffic find that it was shorter for them to go some other way and not cross the tracks there? So that can be done with the travel demand forecasting model to say, well, where would it go instead? We haven't done that yet because in our opinion, we haven't gotten to the point where the delays are so long that people or drivers could save time by just saying, okay, forget it. I'm not even going to go that way. I'm going to go a different way. So there are tools available to do this kind of more on a citywide basis, but it hasn't been done yet.
So I'd like to make an observation. If we start talking about 7 or 8 trains in each direction, we may be talking beyond the year 2030, at which point the automobile traffic may have increased beyond the 2030 plan assumptions. So we have to be careful about relating rail traffic volumes and auto traffic volumes to be consistent, in terms of the analysis that Larry was asking for.
To follow up on what Larry was saying, what we're using is a best case scenario when we're saying 12 trains an hour, but it could go up higher. And so I think we should get some mid-range between 12 trains and 20 trains. But
I think the point that Phil is making is that even though that will happen at some point in the future, if you look at Caltrain's electrification plans, I don't think that that's happening by 2030, or that it should be limited by what Caltrain might actually be able to do by 2030. And so there's a question there that should be clarified by
Yeah, and if
Philip,
I can, I think Caltrain's high growth model was 12 trains. So they had a moderate growth that was 8, and they had, their baseline, which is 6. So I think it's just worth noting that their high growth model was for 12 trains.
I'm sorry. Are they longer? Because I'd heard also that there was, in other words, at night you see those freight trains, they never stop. They just.
I think they'll be a bit longer, but not so much that it would really lengthen the amount of time.
And,
So
if I can, longer possibly, but also faster. So I don't know.
Longer, faster?
Yeah, longer but faster moving. So and faster to accelerate because of the electrification.
We should.
Well, I have a question for you. In terms of ridership, you were saying that the maximum would be 12, is what Caltrain's anticipating?
No, I'm sorry. In their business plan, they had a baseline, then they had a moderate growth, which was 8 trains, and then they had a high growth. And I think that their action was to go for the high growth. I think that was what their board wanted them to do, was go for the high growth.
Well, in light of what Nadia mentioned, the 12 per hour, or rather the 20.
So I would say we'll get more answers when we get Sebastian. How's that?
So in order to move on, because we have a lot more stuff, let me just offer that if we have the tools available to do analysis of future years, more traffic, more trains, whatever the committee would like us to do.
I think we should get some version of this with more trains. How many more trains, I'm happy to leave up to Nadia for her best guess as to how many she thinks realistically there will be. But yeah, it sounds like that would be very helpful.
My gut reaction here is, because it's the first time we're all hearing this, and Gary says he still has a lot to go through, maybe we hear it all, digest it, think about what our suggestions would be, and then when we have this come back again, we can think about what our exact recommendations would be, because we will have had enough time to then consult the Caltrain business plan, the what did we understand, any point of clarification. So that would be my vote for today, if that sounds okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on to Embarcadero and Alma. Here's my little pointer. So this is Lincoln. This is what we're calling, can't see it? Oh, sorry. Oh, wiggle it. So this is Lincoln. This is what we're calling Embarcadero Ramp. This is Kingsley. This is High Street. This is Emerson. So right, these were the intersections that were shown to, whoops, I lost my little pointer. Oh, there it is. These were the intersections that were shown to be deficient if we didn't do anything. This one at Lincoln, this one, and this one, if we didn't do anything. And also, we heard a lot from the neighborhood that right now, if you're coming north, let's say you're coming north on Alma, and you can't turn left at Churchill, so you want to turn left, quote, turn left at Embarcadero, which you can't really do. But in order to do that, you have to come up here, turn on Lincoln, come down to Emerson, come down Emerson, and then make a right turn. So that is the connection that is necessary today. And so if you didn't do anything at this location, there would be quite a bit of increased traffic that would do that. And that would be, in the traffic study, that's identified as a significant impact and something that needs to be, quote, mitigated, needs to be addressed. So this is the improvement that was studied in the simulation, and there's other improvements possible that we'll talk about in a minute, but this was what's studied in the simulation, which is you have a signal at Kingsley, you change Kingsley so you can go both directions. So if you want to make that move that we just talked about, you turn right here, go down Kingsley, turn left, and then you're going west on Embarcadero. If you're coming south, you can turn left on Kingsley, turn left, and then you're going west. So there were a lot of questions about, is there enough storage here? Would it queue? Would the queues be too long? No, the simulation showed this would be okay. Would the queues that are already on Embarcadero cause this signalized intersection to fail because the light would turn green and you couldn't go anywhere? And so based on our observations out there, the answer is no. I mean, there are a couple cycles, which I'm sure people are aware of, where the traffic does back up this far in either direction, but that's not 100% of the time. That's just occasionally, and it clears usually in one cycle. So, and it would be also possible to tie that signal into El Camino, for example, and have them timed so that, you could get the most efficient operation out of it. Also, there's a question, could you accommodate the cycle track plan that's been developed for this? And this drawing actually shows it right here, going this direction, and then right here, going this direction. This thing's hard to do. Anyway, so there's enough right-of-way width on Embarcadero to do this plan without any right-of-way acquisition, and you could still do the cycle track plan. There were questions about how you would access the driveways. There's a few homes right in here. There's a driveway, and there's driveways along here. And how could you access those homes? How could you access those driveways? And I want to emphasize that this is as you can tell, this is a very schematic drawing. And details about how you can access driveways, that needs to be worked out, but we don't think that that's a fatal flaw. We don't think that those houses would need to be acquired, that adequate driveway access could be provided. Trying to think.
Can I ask a couple of questions, Gary?
Yeah, please.
Well, the first one was about the cycle tracks. Are they one way? Is that why they're so skinny? Or
Yeah, they're one way.
They're one
Yeah.
way. And they don't require acquisitions of people's front yards?
No,
or,
no.
Okay. I guess my next question was about you mentioned the driveways that are on the south side, but the houses on the north side that are sort of in between Emerson and High, since they're so close to this proposed light, what sort of mitigations do we have? What are our options for mitigating access to those driveways, as well as the ones you mentioned on the south side? Like what could we do? What options do we have?
We're not talking about really making any changes on the north side, so the driveways would be aligned the same way they are now. I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Well, just if people are queuing at the light, sort of how do people get into their driveways? Is there any conflict there?
No, well, they'll have to wait until the queue dies down. Yeah, and right now, Embarcadero is very busy, as everyone knows, and so it's challenging to get in and out of those driveways as it is, I can imagine. Let's see, another question was, are you going to get a lot more delays by having a signal on Alma at Kingsley? And again, like you asked before about those other signals, anytime you have a signal and it turns red, then you're going to stop some cars. Though under this scheme, we're talking about closing Churchill, so that intersection is going to cycle, faster than what it does now. Trying to think of the other questions. I know. One was that somebody asked, and this is an important point, do you need to widen the overcrossing for this? Yes, you do. Right there, where I'm pointing. So this, right now there's only one lane northbound on Alma right there, and this requires 2 lanes. So that overcrossing has to be widened to accommodate.
Can you clarify why?
Why?
Like why we need 2 lanes?
Well, because when you have the signal, you need to have 2 lanes leaving the signal so you can get the maximum utility out of the 2 lanes that go through the signal. And so if you had a merge point just past that, you would get a huge imbalance between those 2 lanes, and then you wouldn't get a very good function at the signal, and so it wouldn't really work.
But what if you had one of them right turn and one of them straight or something like that?
Well, the volume going straight is substantial. The volume turning right is not that high, so.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No. So it wouldn't be efficient to have a straight and a right turn. We looked at that. That's a good question.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, we did look at that. So let me.
I have a couple more questions.
Oh, you bet.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And Kingsley is 4 lanes. Is it currently 4 lanes?
No.
Across?
No, it's not. So this would require widening Kingsley. Kingsley's only 2 lanes. So.
And we think we need.
We don't
2
need
lanes for each direction on that one. Can you help me understand why?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, maybe you could start with 1 lane and have it flare out to 2. So again, this is just schematic. It's not a final design, but we're not taking anybody's front yard for this. I mean, the widening is going into the embankment on the.
That's very helpful. Thank you to clarify. And one more question, flow-wise, when you go, actually it's 2 questions. When you're going from the Pali side down Embarcadero under the underpass, you're going from 6 total lanes wide, like 2 in one direction, 4 in the other, and you narrow it down to 3, 1 in one direction and 2 in the other. Do we foresee any problems with that?
That's the existing configuration, I think. If I'm understanding your question, are you talking, well, let me get my pointer to work. Are you talking about right in here?
Yes.
Right in there? This is the existing configuration right now. That's what it's like.
Okay, so we don't get any improvement to the existing configuration at that bottleneck point?
Oops, get my get thing going. No, but I don't believe that is a bottleneck. I believe the bottleneck, because if you're going eastbound, once you get past the Pali driveway, there's no signal until you get to Bryant. And that's where the bottleneck happens, from Bryant, because you get a signal there. So this would move the signal to here. So in that sense, it would move the backup a little bit closer to El Camino because the signal moves closer. But, going underneath this bridge, that's, in my opinion, that's not a constraint point. So we got a lot of questions about, why shouldn't we widen this bridge so that it's 2 lanes in each direction? And my response to that is, you don't need 2 lanes. That would be a complete waste of money. You would see no change whatsoever by doing that.
Thank you. I think it's really helpful for the members, the public that are here to hear that.
I thought of another question that comes up is, well, couldn't the cars, even with this, couldn't the cars still go like this, up Lincoln, down to Emerson and around, and not use this little link here? And the answer is yes, they could still do that. And so what we wanted to do with this is to provide a different way. Because right now, the only way to make that connection is Lincoln to Emerson. We wanted to provide this other way to go. If people were very, very concerned about the fact that that other route still existed, it would be possible to put constraints on that other route so that the cars would tend not to go that way. You could put channelizers, or you could put speed humps, or and that hasn't, that hasn't been explored, but it's definitely, doable. If there was really a concern that, hey, you spent all this money and no one's going to use it anyway, then it's designed so that everyone can use this. So we assigned all the traffic to go this way, and this is designed to accommodate it. So we're not relying on that existing route.
Thank you.
We believe that this would result in less traffic on Emerson because it would apply not only to the diverted traffic, but all the traffic that exists today that's doing that would have an option as well.
Last question then, what about the movement from High to Kingsley to go south on Alma? It doesn't appear that movement is possible. What's your vision? Would they use the old route to go kind of
They could use the old route. There's also I'll show you in a minute, a variation of this that would tie High into the signal. I don't know if people would actually want to do that. The other thing that I would point out, this particular one, if you're going west on Embarcadero and you want to go north on Alma, the way this is drawn, you'd have to make a left turn at the signal, go on Kingsley, and then make a right turn. There's also an option to keep the existing connection to the Embarcadero ramp so that you could go from Embarcadero to the Embarcadero ramp and then just make a right turn onto Alma. So that's where I said there's options for how this could be designed depending on kind of like the community/city consensus of what would be the best.
Thank you.
So I'm going to advance to make sure I've talked about all these things. Requires widening of Alma overcrossing, can accommodate the cycle track, 2 new signals. So we saw the 2 new signals. You can tie High Street in as an option, or you can maintain the connection like we talked about. I didn't talk about this, but we have a better illustration of this actually, but it's also, there's talk about not eliminating the signal at the crosswalk valley, and then instead put a different grade crossing there, or improved grade crossing, so you'd kind of eliminate one signal at the same time you're adding one. We looked at the queuing for this, and the queuing would not be excessive. We need to work out the driveway access, pedestrian bicycle safety as a function of the design. So like I said, traffic could still use Emerson, but it's a longer route than what we proposed for Kingsley. So here's what we're calling design option. I'm sure everyone's seen this picture before, and there were a lot of questions about this because it doesn't exactly match what I showed you before. So we're calling it design option. This also doesn't show a signal at Alma and Kingsley, but a signal would be needed there. So what's different about this option is that it shows High Street to be tied into the signal. So you could say go straight from Kingsley right across. Well, this shows them turn left or right. So basically it allows traffic to use High Street to come out, use that signal, and access Embarcadero. This design option also keeps that connection on the Embarcadero ramp up to Alma, so you could make a right turn. So I think this is just illustrating that there are options for how this could be controlled. Just one more thing. This also doesn't show the cycle track, but it would be feasible on this option as well.
That's the first my question, but the
Yeah.
second was, this shows the pedestrian flyover there.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, it wasn't on the previous design. I didn't think I saw it. And
On
so-
the previous slide?
Yeah.
The previous slide didn't go that far. This, it's over here. It's kind of past this, the edge of this
It doesn't
picture.
show, but
So it doesn't
you
show
meant
up.
to have it.
Well, that's not an essential part of this, but it's an independent, it's a project with independent utility, I think, but it would allow you to not have that signal there, which would help, the overall flow.
Exactly. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
what
Gary, I have hopefully a quick question. What's the dominant turning activity here? Which directions do people generally turn? What's the most throughput that we have to support for the turning?
Well, there's a left turn off of Alma onto Kingsley. That's a pretty heavy movement.
So that's southbound Alma?
Southbound Alma onto Kingsley, which exists today. But it would increase because now you could, when you got to Embarcadero, you could go either way. Right now, you only turn right. And then, the right and left off Kingsley onto Embarcadero would be about the same volume.
Say that again, right and left off of Kingsley.
Off of Kingsley onto Embarcadero, they would be about the same volume.
Okay. How about people coming on Embarcadero? The ones that go on Alma, are they going downtown or are they going south?
The ones that...
So people coming from 101 towards Stanford on Embarcadero, those people that turn onto Alma,
so this one here, this left,
yeah.
and then they go up to here?
Yeah, which direction would it be that you'd be turning at that light? Right or left or equal or?
I think that would be pretty equal too. Right now, you can't turn left, so we don't know exactly how much traffic would do that if you would allow them to do that. But I think the demand is pretty comparable for those movements.
But now you have a lot more, so you have a lot more people coming under the underpass and making a hard right to get onto Kingsley and then decide to turn north or south. That's where the potential backup is. So I think the concern that I think maybe you're getting to, Keith, that is a concern for me is because that lane is only a single lane coming underneath the underpass, you now are handling both the folks that are traveling westbound on Embarcadero who would turn onto Kingsley and make the unsignalized left, but then also all of the people who now didn't make a turn on Alma who now are coming under off of a single lane and are now going to queue up in that right lane to turn on Kingsley. And if that queuing gets longer than the length of Kingsley and however long that little pocket, the turn pocket is there under there, you will now back up the rest of the traffic from the point of the underpass all the way back into the town and country light and all the way back into El Camino.
But you can do that now. You can turn right onto Kingsley.
Right, but now you've added all the Alma traffic, right? All the Churchill people who couldn't do that movement before are now doing that movement.
Right.
And so the question is that turn pocket plus the length of Kingsley, I don't know how many cars fit on Kingsley? Because I think in this picture you have only one lane and they can turn left or right. Does that match the other page too?
Well, the other page has 2 lanes there.
Okay.
Because you need 2 lanes for the queuing.
Right, so the question is how much queuing can happen there? How many cars fit? It's a distance thing, right?
Off the top of the head, I don't know, 20 cars maybe?
10 in each lane?
10 in each lane, yeah.
And then in that turn pocket that is coming out from under the underpass, that would be another...
Well, this drawing is incorrect right there. That would not be a turn lane. It wouldn't function with that being a turn lane. It has to be a through right turn combination lane.
Oh, boy.
It takes 1 car to block it.
So it only takes 1 car to block it. Coming out from that underpass, if you only have a single lane.
Well, that would change from what is now an uncontrolled movement to a signalized movement. So you would only go on a green light to make that turn. So the simulation showed that wouldn't back up very far, that it wouldn't back up as far as the Pali driveway. So we believe that what you're talking about there in terms of a queue that just goes all the way down Kingsley and then around the corner and onto Embarcadero, the simulation did not show that happening.
So I am going to follow my own rule, which is we'll probably decide this at the next meeting, but I will just throw out there that if ever there was a simulation that I would like to see with dots and whatnot, these movements are the ones for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what would be useful, whenever I see two intersections this close, I get very nervous there's going to be some interaction between the two, and one's going to interfere with the other. So knowing what you predict for cars per hour during peak hours going up Kingsley, that would be very useful, because you could see, well, if it can only hold 10 cars and I'm doing 500 cars an hour, how quickly does that cycle have to clear that? That would be useful.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we can provide that, definitely.
I have some questions, Gary, about the bridge.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this, but there are actually staircases that go from the pedestrian bicycle sidewalk up to the sidewalk that is on the bridge on the eastbound side, I guess, and nothing on the westbound side. So I'm wondering first if we can maintain those staircases, given that we're taking some of the land of that embankment, and if we could add any on the westbound side.
Well, you want to take that question?
Yeah, this came up. We took a look at that. I think I'm looking at a picture on my screen here that shows widening on one side, but I think the exhibits that we sent you guys in the fall showed widening on both sides, so it would eliminate that stairway. But to be honest, it's the tweak you're talking about, we could possibly do. We haven't looked at that carefully yet. So
Okay.
I think what you're saying is, can we do all the widening on the east side of the bridge? I think that's what you're asking, so we could keep that stairway in place.
Yeah, could we maintain the ones on the east side of the bridge, and could we add ones on the
Right.
western side? Just because I've heard from the neighbors that there are lots of Pali kids that use those staircases to sort of get to and from the school, and like their parents or whatever picking them up.
Right.
And so those are currently used in the mornings and afternoons.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's something we could look at more closely. Actually, now I have the mic here. I wanted to ask you quickly, Gary, when we first started looking at these back in this summer, I'm looking at one of the first, Gary, if you look at my screen for a second, we looked at a roundabout here, and I think we just immediately went into looking at these two options for the signalized intersection. I know that there's a lot of members on the XCAP and in the community that favor roundabouts. Is that something we can maybe revisit?
The roundabout,
or is that?
The roundabout didn't function.
Oh, it did not?
No.
Okay.
Because the volume on Embarcadero is substantially higher than the volume on Kingsley.
Okay.
And so anytime you have a situation where you've got a big mismatch between the two streets, roundabouts don't work very well, because now you've got to put every single car through that roundabout on Embarcadero. And so we weren't able to get it to function. Also, you don't have much separation between the legs. I'm sorry, you guys, I'm looking at a picture and you guys aren't looking at it. But here's Embarcadero, here's Kingsley. So roundabouts don't work very well when you have streets coming into the roundabout that are really close together. You want the street to be like this, and the geometrics of that don't really work in our favor.
This might also be a question for Peter, but sort of also related to the bridge. Widening it, is that actually possible with that bridge? Would we need to like delete the whole bridge and put in a new one?
No, widening bridges are commonly done like this, where you widen it just for one lane. Again, it's something we'd have to look into more detail about exactly what would need to be done. We looked at the as-built for the bridge. At first glance, it looked feasible, so not a fatal flaw.
Do we have sort of a cost estimate, or is there like a cost range?
Yeah, we use for planning purposes, we use square footage costs for bridges. I believe the widening would be on the order of $300 to $400 a square foot.
So I just wanted to do a time check. It's 5:30, and what I wanted to do is let him finish his presentation maybe, and then take public comment. And so if ex-cappers during that time can be both listening to public comment, but also thinking about whatever final questions we have. And again, this is not, we have time to further digest this and think further, so we don't feel like if you are thinking of something, you can't get it in. Certainly if it's something that you have already formed your question, feel free. But Gary, I'll give it back to you, and then we'll move to public comment afterwards.
Okay, so we only have a couple more slides. We talked about that. This one's hard to read, maybe, but this is the level of service results. I think, yeah, so there's one for existing and there's one for 2030. So I think rather than spending a lot of time going over this is in the report if you really want to dig into the details of it, but I think we got a lot of questions about this, you know, what does delay mean and so forth. And I can go over it more if you want to dig into it, but there are a couple of salient points to make from this. And so at the intersections that we were really having problems dealing with were Embarcadero and El Camino and Page Mill and El Camino. And Embarcadero and El Camino, if you look at the chart, you'll see that under 2030, with the improvement, with the traffic from Churchill reassigned, that intersection is worse than it would be without the Churchill traffic and without improvements. So we didn't quite, with those improvements that we just showed you, we didn't quite get it to the no project condition. But
I think you're going to have to repeat that one more time.
Okay, so.
Slowly for those of us non-traffic
So
people.
if we could use the number, are you talking about number 4, El Camino and Embarcadero?
So, yeah, let's look at the table here.
It's easier to see on the 2030 chart than it is on.
This is the 2030 chart.
Yeah.
And intersection number 4, El Camino and Embarcadero, you'll see that in the year 2030, with no improvements and Churchill open like it is, we show 70.6 seconds of delay. With the Churchill traffic reassigned in the AM, and with the improvements, it's 73.6. So it's a little worse. So we didn't quite get it back to the no project condition with the improvement that we showed you, which was that second left turn lane. However, we did discuss there's a lot of other things that you could do at that particular intersection that we didn't investigate. But that one has quite a few options. The other one, I guess we can stay on this chart as well. For number 5, which is El Camino and Page Mill, you can see that in the PM, the delay was 76.8 with no improvements and without the Churchill closure. And with the Churchill closure and with the improvements, it's like 92, it's level of service F, so it's E versus F. So even with the improvements, we weren't able to get it to the no project conditions. And that intersection is pretty much built out. There's nothing else that we can do at El Camino and Page Mill. So that's going to be, you know, if we were doing an environmental analysis of this until we change to VMT, which is another discussion, that would be a significant unavoidable impact of the Churchill closure.
Gary, is it possible, because you've only done a traffic study talking about Churchill, but in 2030, there's a possibility that Meadow and Charleston are now separated, and that could have a network effect that could improve Page Mill to some extent now.
It could. I mean, they're pretty far away from Page Mill, so I don't know how much traffic, you know, has the option of whether to use Meadow or Page Mill, but it's, you know, something to keep in the back of your mind, I would say, especially if they, you know, if they really experience a horrible condition and they'll say, forget it, I'm going to try something different.
Well, so if in your opinion they're too far apart, that's important to note, because I think one of the questions people will have is, well, this is just taking Churchill in isolation, and we're looking at doing something for Meadow and for Charleston as well. And so at some point someone will ask you, well, if Meadow and Charleston are open, what does that mean? And I just heard you say that it's too far apart, so it doesn't impact that, but having a blurb about that somewhere would be helpful.
Well, that's just off the top of my head. I mean, we can take a closer look at it to see whether, you know, really there would be some difference, but they are pretty far apart. So that's the point I want to make about the level of service, is that even we showed you these improvements and we said, you know, we can sort of accommodate the traffic. We can't quite accommodate all of the traffic at this intersection. So that was actually, the only other slide I had was, Chantel, you put a slide in of of upcoming public meetings. Do you want to go over that?
So the last slide that Gary is referencing, you can skip to it.
Do you want me to do it?
Yeah. The last slide is a copy of the flyer for upcoming community engagement. A few people that submitted questions had the question of what type of outreach and engagement are we going to do, and these town hall meetings and word on the street are more in the neighborhoods than some of our other community meetings have been. So we wanted to include this just so that everyone had the dates and locations for those. And most relevant to the topic we're talking about right now is the one on March 12th at Palo Alto High School, where we'll be discussing the Churchill grade crossing. And so that's another opportunity for us to get in that neighborhood and really discuss the options, alternatives on the table related to that particular grade crossing. So we just included it so people can see that outreach will be done.
Chantal, can we get copies of this flyer that we can
Yes.
distribute? Can you email them to us?
Yes, I
Those
can
of
do
you
that.
interested in doing a public comment, could you just, on this item, could you just raise your hand for me so I get a sense of how many we have? Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to do 2 minutes each. And again, this is just your 2 minutes tonight. There's more time, so please don't feel stressed. And if I can have you line up at the mic, and we'll just go 2 at a time. Chantal, will you be my timer? Because I haven't figured this out.
I will. And also about the flyer, when I sent out the notice for this meeting, both to the public and the XCAP, there's a link to the flyer in that email as well. And I'll send it again.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Young Jae-oh. My husband and I live in Churchill Avenue in the Southgate area. We love our house and the neighborhood and want to make sure that any measures taken for grade separation at Churchill would not irrevocably destroy or degrade the neighborhood characteristics that we also value and love. We strongly support the closure of Churchill Avenue as the best of all proposed alternatives. This closure has been supported by the more than 500 Palo Alto residents who signed a petition that was submitted to the City Council a few months ago. Other alternatives currently under consideration, namely the viaduct or one that keeps Churchill eastward access to Alma, will result in unacceptable and drastic visual and noise pollution to the neighborhood, significant privacy and safety risks, and an unbearable traffic on Churchill next to the Palo Alto High School. All this in addition to potential takeovers of homes that are very dear and do mean a huge deal to their owners. Yes, it may be a bit inconvenient to lose access to Alma and to incur some extra delay in our commutes, but this is a small price for avoiding all the negative impacts of the alternatives. Plus, it is a much more cost-effective solution, $50 million for traffic mitigation being discussed today versus $200 to $500 million for the alternatives. We strongly and passionately ask you to recommend Churchill Avenue enclosure as the best solution for grade separation on Churchill. Thank you.
Please don't clap or boo. You have to let everyone have their free words. Thanks.
Is this on? Yeah. You know that I'm going to say the exact opposite, and that the 500 doesn't include what we consider to be the majority of the Southgate neighborhood. But I don't want to have that argument right now. I was kind of hyperventilating as I was looking at the level of service projections for the year 2030 with no closure, and then the even worse conditions on the routes that I would now be forced to take out of my neighborhood with closure, with and without improvements. And one thing that struck me as I was going through the very good hexagon study is that we've gone to the work of projecting traffic issues along Churchill and Alma under a do-nothing scenario. A lot of work has gone into looking at what's going to happen with mitigations with the Churchill closure. Have we studied what happens to traffic if we do a true grade separation at Churchill? Would that be worth doing? How does that change the equation? What happens to throughput on Alma? What happens to the backups on Churchill for a limited number of hours a day, even as it stands now? You know, is it worth modeling that? I'd kind of like to know. And then I also just want to encourage the work to look beyond 2030, because whatever we're doing here is going to last a lot longer than that. And I'm quite nervous about some of the impacts of closure as the traffic gets worse overall. Thanks.
So I'm Neva Yarkin, and I live on Churchill. And a big question I have is former Palo Alto Mayor Pat Burt said at one of the XCAP meetings recently, the city has no money. If the city has no money, why are we even considering 5 new options, all with questionable costs? Why waste the consultant's time, or for that matter, our time? Thanks.
All right, so first I want to applaud the consultants and I guess the committee for directing the consultants on their work to bring some objective analysis to what, unfortunately, I mean, myself included, we all have personal and passionate kind of commentary on this because it affects our lives. So I just want to make some brief comments in support of the mitigations that were proposed by Gary, without talking about whether or not Churchill is closed or not closed, because I personally think that that's less of an issue. Just to put things in perspective, we've had 2 years of analysis done on this, 2 years of data being brought to this committee, and I think we lose a train. We get so caught up in the moment of this corner, this intersection. But in this analysis, we have to look back at the larger picture of the kind of the body of data that's been brought. So the first thing is, there was clamoring of data, how much traffic, where is it crossing, et cetera, et cetera. A year and a half ago, we had the traffic study that was done. You can't see this, but what it says is at Churchill, there's 9,000 cars a day. 84% of them are traversing from Alma to El Camino or El Camino to Alma, depending on the time of the day. They're not traversing onwards through Churchill. It's clear that they're just going from El Camino to Alma. Why? Because Embarcadero is broken. That was the next analysis that was done. This is the traffic origination and destination study. This is all objective data. I mean, presumably we can believe our consultants. Over 60% of the traffic that passes through Churchill passes by Embarcadero. Let me repeat that. 60% of the traffic that goes across the intersection at Churchill passes by an existing grade separation. Why? Because it's broken, for all the reasons that Gary went through. There's 2 of the 4 turn directions you cannot turn. You also put yourself in jeopardy by crossing Alma without any without a light. We know now from today's presentation that the backup, if we did nothing, which seems to be what some people are proposing, would be 1/3 of a mile down Alma in the morning and all the way around to Stanford in the afternoon to El Camino. So my last comment would be to let's pursue, for $50 million, let's do the right thing and pursue the mitigations.
Next.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Barbara Hazlett, and I live at 1176 Emerson Street, right on the north side of Embarcadero. So you can understand that I have a very personal perspective on the mitigations being proposed for Embarcadero. I just want you to know, kind of pull everybody out of the weeds to the practicality of living where I do and what the current state of affairs is. I know Gary has very important, sophisticated software, but let me tell you that people are going out of their minds already on Embarcadero. The honking that I hear during peak hours has become increasingly intolerable. You know, this whole idea of clearing queues off of Alma, what are you doing about clearing queues off of Embarcadero? When you add more stoplights and a truly very convoluted intersection, you know, I hope it's a mitigation, but practically speaking, things are out of control already. And then the final point that I'll make is that I know you all have tried to deal with this, but when Palo Alto Avenue is closed, you can imagine what's going to happen to El Camino. And I really would like to hear Gary's very good ideas about what he can do with the El Camino Embarcadero intersection. He said there are a lot more creative ideas than adding that one additional intersection that his drawing showed. I'd sure like to hear what that is. Thank you.
Carrie Yarkin, 135 Churchill. I wanted to thank Gary. I just want to remark on the traffic lights at Alma off of Oregon. That is an idea that should have happened 20 years ago. I'm glad you're finally now considering it. I'm always making that left turn going south on Alma to get over to Oregon. Has room for 2 cars, and they're narrow lanes, and it's very unsafe. So I'm glad you're adding the 2 lights there to connect the on and off ramps with, I guess, Oregon and Alma. And then I also just wanted to remark on the mitigations. The traffic light on Alma that's over by Kingsley, that is also, now there's no light. And if you try to make a left turn, it is terrible. It's supposed to be a truck route. So I see some trucks going up there and trying to make a left turn off of Kingsley onto Alma. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's completely unsafe. So I'm glad you're finally doing traffic mitigations that should have been done for me, I think, at least 20 years ago. There was a question about queues on Kingsley from people's driveways. Well, if you live on the 135 Churchill, or the houses on the right side of Churchill, south of Alma, east of Alma, you cannot get out of your driveway right now. So now you're talking about Kingsley might have some backups or some issues with their driveways. We are already locked in. We cannot park in our driveways. We have to park on Emerson. We cannot use our street to even get in and out because there's so much traffic during a lot of the peak hours on Churchill. So you've got a terrible situation right now. And if you don't close Churchill, it's going to be even worse. So I think that should be taken into account. Thank you, Gary.
Hi, Dexter Girton, live 1141 High Street, right at the intersection on Embarcadero Road. And I want to mention that it's not just cars, it's trucks. So I see from time to time, unfortunately too often, long trucks which are eastbound on Embarcadero Road, trying to make that sharp turn onto Kingsley. And most of them make it, some don't. And some of the ones that make it swing clear over as far as they possibly can into the Kingsley lane right next to the parked cars. And in order to make that turn, their wheels go up on the curb, and most of them make it around. A few don't make it. They give up and back up slowly if they can while the cars are jammed up behind them. So something to think about. It's just not just cars, it's trucks. And it's a significant number of trucks. Deliveries, construction, so forth. So I imagine you people have looked into that, but it's something I just observe and see there. Also, bicycles. Bicycles are a big deal with a high school. So they have to cross some way or other. So I'd like to see that being taken into account.
Hi, ex-CAP committee. Thank you very much for listening. I live on 115 Embarcadero Road, which is the Embarcadero ramp that connects Embarcadero to Alma. So, thanks, Gary, for sharing the diagrams. I didn't see the diagram with the light on that road this time. So, one of the things is what we were concerned with was the light at that end of that road, and that is really going to impact us. There's a lot of parents that drop off kids that go down the bridge and get to Pali, and so. What we are concerned about mostly is the walkability of the area, and that's what we are, and safety. And I think that's the two things we want to make sure that we consider as we consider the traffic mitigation. It's not just about cars and cars stopping, but it's also making sure that that area is walkable. And that's kind of the big deal about Professorville and that neighborhood, and we want to make sure that that character does not go away, it stays safe. There are concerns on the LOS, which assume a signal. So if you look at the LOS diagrams that you showed, assume the signal there, but you didn't show it. So I'm a little bit confused on how do we address that, and I was wondering if there is possible to talk to Gary offline or in some way to kind of get some clarifications, because only one of the options was presented. Thank you.
If we could, if you guys could line up behind them so that we can just go faster and there's less turnover time. Thank you.
David Kennedy, I'd like to follow up on the question on walkability at the Embarcadero Alma area. One of the things I just saw tonight was something called planned cycle tracks, and it was going to be shoved in alongside the Embarcadero Road, it looked like. I don't live on Ross Road, but I haven't heard of planned cycle tracks before. So I think it'd be good to talk to us about what that is, because, excuse me, it's very narrow there now. It's almost unsafe to walk, and I tend to try and walk over there to Town and Country. And so between the bicycles and the pedestrians, I think that needs some looking at.
Thank you. I'm Eduardo Jack. I live in 36 Churchill, and I wanted to ask Gary, just to confirm that I'm understanding this chart here that you had. When you say that we're going from F's and E's to A's and C's and A's and so on, is that like a normal grade, A being better than F? Okay, so it seems like with improvements, almost everything gets improved except item number 5. Okay, great. I just want to make sure I understood that. And I think you asked a question about the number of cars in Embarcadero, and you said it was something like 3,000. At one point, you were saying there's about 3,000 or 30,000. There was a very large number of cars that were going on in Embarcadero.
Just go ahead and keep talking, because he can't respond to your comments, so you can just say it into the record.
Sure. And I think you pointed out that it was something like 150 cars that were now being added, which I think, if my math is correct, is 5%. So I think we just kind of keep in mind what the overall capacity of El Camino and Embarcadero are, and if we're adding 150 cars, even though it's more than 50, it's still only 5% or so on. So thank you.
Thank you again, ex-CAP committee. I have to move this a little bit lower. So I live at the intersection of Alma and Embarcadero, and I have like two major concerns. One is like a top-down concern. If you think about the Embarcadero Alma intersection as a regional node, it's got 5 major amenities: Stanford, Pali High School, Town and Country, Castellea, and downtown. So this is a very unusually intricate node as it is. And if you take traffic from any other node, which is not east-west going, and put it out of this node, I think it takes a little bit more of a network delay diagram and an integrated picture of the entire traffic flow. I think we've seen separate diagrams of the different intersections, but I think this particular node has to be taken a little bit more seriously, just because there's already so much happening here. It's only going to bound to increase. The second major thing is around a bottom-up thing, which is around the safety. Having lived there for about 5 years, we know how many children are dropped off in the morning at Embarcadero Slip Road and how many kids are walking down the staircases. I think if you start adding more traffic, even if you do traffic calming, even if you do all the mitigations you have shown in your idyllic scenes in the report, I think that couldn't be further than the truth. I think it's going to be a huge impact on the safety. Dexter talked about trucks, cars, and if you add the children who are walking and biking there, it's really going to be horrendous out there. So please take that into account. And as people who live there, I think we can talk to you, and maybe the simulation and the empirical information that neighbors have out there can actually make for a better study. Thank you.
Steve Carlson from Southgate. I just, first of all, want to thank the ex-CAP committee for taking the time to take this deep dive into the traffic study, and also Gary for attempting to answer as many of the questions as you did. So just my comments are really just about the big picture in terms of growth, because I think there's some questions there. And one of the questions I have is that, you know, we're looking at the 2030 projections that are already there. I'm a little bit unclear about how much growth Palo Alto has put into that 2030 projection. We don't have numbers here. But I do know that what is really driving this whole discussion is Caltrain's long-range business and service plan. And in particular, their projection of growth by 2040 is 40%. increased population density along their corridor, which they define as 2 miles on either side of the tracks. And that's what's driving their medium and high growth scenarios in terms of trains. So as we're thinking about that and trying to plan for that, I think it's also important that we make sure that we're using numbers that match. And I'm not clear how close we're getting to that by looking at 2030, but I think one of the things that would be helpful as the model has been built now for the mitigations at Embarcadero in Alma, to understand at what level of growth do queues there become unacceptable. So we understand that it looks like they might work at that intersection based on the 2030 Palo Alto numbers, but what if we do see larger population growth as Caltrain is projecting? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aileen Lee. I live on Churchill Avenue on the south side of Palo Alto High School. Thanks again for giving us this time. I just wanted to share, like some of the folks in our neighborhood and around, when I first heard about potential closing of Churchill, I was concerned about decrease in convenience because it is a very convenient cut through. But in learning about the cost of the other options and also potentially the negative impact to both sides of Alma for the neighborhood and the livability and the walkability of the Southgate neighborhood and the Old Palo Alto neighborhood, I think for the greater good, the best thing, and from a cost perspective and a safety for the thousands of students who are biking and walking, it's already quite backed up. We can't get out of our driveway at many times of the day with the existing backups from the train crossings. So I just think the negative impact to the entire neighborhood when there's more trains and more times of not being able to get across Churchill, I just think it will be unbearable. I mean, and I think the studies show it on both sides. And it's also just quite dangerous. I think the fact that there haven't been more accidents with the number of pedestrians and bicyclists, I actually got fully rear-ended by somebody who was speeding down Churchill, and it totaled my car when I was backing out of my driveway. It's quite dangerous. And so I think I have come to the sad conclusion that closure is probably the most feasible option, and I think that as more folks in the neighborhood understand the alternatives, it is the most practical way to go. Thank you.
Okay, ex-com members, yeah.
I just wanted to ask the question that was raised since he wasn't able to get an answer. I also heard that and wrote it down. I was sort of surprised. I heard you say the average was 3,500 cars per hour in either direction. Did you say that? I wrote down what I thought he heard. I heard
the question was the total volume going through the intersection of El Camino and Embarcadero. And off the top of my head, I offered that as an estimate, but I don't have the actual number. In the highest hour, yeah. It doesn't mean, every hour, but the highest hour, yeah.
But that's a total of all directions?
The total of all directions, yeah, yeah.
The numbers on the chart were in each direction. So we're comparing apples and oranges if we compare 180 with 3,500.
Also, I am not a traffic engineer, but traffic is not linear. So a 5% increase in traffic could be the difference between a traffic jam and no traffic jam, as I understand it.
So I have a question there. So there are a lot of, a couple of questions about the future traffics, right? When you do traffic study, what's a typical study period that you project to do it? Here it's 20 years, right? Seems to me, it's my lifetime. I'm not going to be there. So, and then I also was traffic software engineer, and we looked at it more maybe 10 years or so. But what is the typical study you do for traffic studies?
Well, we looked at 2030 here because that's the forecast year of the city's general plan. So the city does not have any forecasts of growth beyond 2030. So will the city grow beyond 2030? I don't know, but they don't have any forecasts of it. And that's only 10 years, by the way, so.
Right, 10 years.
When we talk about growth, let me point out one thing.
Caltrans, if you're doing
I just want to, when you're talking about numbers of growth and cars going through various intersections, It's not enough to talk about Palo Alto, because I can't remember the percentage, but it's somewhere around, 50% or more of the traffic that comes on any of these streets is cut-through traffic. It doesn't originate in Palo Alto and doesn't end in Palo Alto. So you may want to talk about controlling growth in Palo Alto, but that won't work to diminish these traffic numbers unless you get cooperation from all of the other surrounding communities as well.
I was just going to answer the question about how far out you usually project. And it's all over the map in terms of what type of project that you're looking at. I will say that if you're working on a Caltrans project, Caltrans requires a projection 25 years in the future. So if we were doing a Caltrans project right now, they would want to see a 2045 forecast.
Okay, XCAP members, unless you have a burning question that you are not willing to submit, I would propose that we all take a 5-minute, break before we can go with the rest of the agenda. But I'd like to thank Gary and Peter for coming today. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm sure we'll have more questions. Okay, 5 minutes, really 5 minutes, guys. Thanks.
So what are we doing? 19. That's 20. So it's like 40. I'm not going to be here.
doesn't. Okay, everybody. So, oh, the gavel. The gavel. There we go. Larry, I love this. I can't even see where the gavel goes before I break everything up here. Okay, so we're going to go to the next. So the next item on the agenda is actually a discussion. So it's item number 4, to prepare for the City Council update, which I am going to ask my fellow XCAP members if we can move that to be after. I want to do 5 and 6 and then come back to that, because that way it's a final wrap-up of today's meeting, so that when we're discussing what I'm going to go say to City Council, we have discussed everything else in this agenda, if that's okay with everybody. Is anybody opposed to that?
Do you need a motion?
And I don't need a motion, I just need to see show of hands. Okay, perfect, okay. All right, great, so then that means we're going to move to number 5, which is XCAP member update and working group updates. And so I will ask the different groups if they want to update us on where they are. Dave, you and I will need to talk at some point, because we should talk about when Norm can come. But Megan, I know you have an update at least on one group, so you wanted to go first and then.
Sure. The measurable criteria group had a meeting and attempted to come up with measurable criteria. We came up with this list of questions, which I handed out to you all, and I think it's also, Chantal put it on the back table. It's called the measurable criteria questions, where for each criteria, we sort of listed some questions we had about it. And so these are for discussion. Originally, we thought about proposing the first one, the one for City Council, to City Council, but now perhaps we're not going to do that. But these are for discussion, and we'd like to hear from folks whether they agree with proposing these questions to the, at least the staff and consultants.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so the this group is looking at what existing measurements already are in things like the comprehensive plan and the Palo Alto Rail study and those sorts of things, and trying to come up with, okay, what are there any existing numbers that we could eventually use to apply the criteria that council has given us? And so these questions reflect questions that we have for the we have one question for City Council, and then questions for staff and questions for the consultants about sort of metrics and things that would be helpful for us to understand when we try to think about what is measurable in the criteria. So that's what that is. Go ahead, Carrie.
And the A through J refers to what's the title of the document with all the grid, the big?
Yeah, so on the website, there's a fact sheets page, and the last document on the fact sheets page is all of the options with the measurable, using this measurable criteria, and those letters refer to those numbered topic or numbered criteria, lettered criteria. Yep, Greg?
It's hard. I have a question that might be for legal, and I actually got an email from the Caltrain group on this. Connectivity was one of the requirements. Other than traffic impact, there's the possibility of additional bicycle and pedestrian connectivity depending on what option we choose. But we don't know if we're allowed to do that because Caltrain owns the right-of-way. So is there a question we can ask somebody to find out if bicycle and pedestrian connectivity could be a measurable impact?
So great question. I think that's actually, when we go through the XCAP questions that we have,
that was actually,
yeah, that was one of the lists, that was one of the questions that we had kind of generally. It's along the lines of also, if you had an elevated viaduct, for example, could you use the space underneath? So I think we can, that should be able to be addressed under that.
It's more may we rather than can we.
This is more, dear staff or anybody who can help us, are there current metrics about connectivity that we don't know about? You know, do we rate connection points in some way that we don't know about? Right, and could you help point us out to where those are so we can understand them and then apply them?
Yeah, and I reiterate, I totally agree that noise should be we need a way to quantify noise because a lot of people have a lot of assumptions about noise and we have no data.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about that, and I just want to, for the benefit of the whole group, the comprehensive plan has these maps that are called, they have noise contour maps, they're called, and so they've already, they're color-coded sort of yellow, orange, and red, and they show current decibel levels of existing noise corridors, including Caltrain and the 101. And so what our group struggled with is that we know from talking to the city manager that at this level of engineering, there isn't going to be enough specifics about what type of noise can be expected with the various type of grade separations, because engineers are very precise. And so they really don't want to say, oh, the noise will be this much or that much, because the height of the viaduct would matter and what other mitigations would matter. And so the best point of reference I could offer this group is that Menlo Park is a little bit more advanced. They've had a little bit more level of engineering. Basically, whatever the next level of engineering would be it would match what we're looking for. And in looking at their reports, you can see that they actually don't have any information on noise and vibration. So the challenge for us as a group is going to be, while we might have a lot of questions about that and we want to measure that, we may not have that level of detail to that point. So one of the best things that we might be able to do as a group would be to say, well, we've looked at the comprehensive plan, and the comp plan says we can't have more than 70 decibels in a noise corridor, and so we would recommend that whatever potential mitigations are looked at for any of these alternatives are not to exceed that number that's already in the comp plan. That may be the best we can do, but we're happy to ask staff and see if there's any clarification about other stuff that we just didn't know about because we're not noise experts. Does that? Yeah. Tony?
Just a question. I'm going to use this one. So on comments on this traffic report, it seems like it's a very well done, sort of generic, meaning it's a traffic model that models cars mainly. And Palo Alto has, in the past, in at least 30 years, has moved in the direction of pedestrian and bicycle priority. And I don't see that as a priority in these studies. It's more, how do we move cars, but then the intricate impacts on people, on trees, on the DNA of Palo Alto is not really looked at, and so I don't know how to say that or include that in these studies, but I think there's a deficiency there.
Tony, I would just comment that could, I don't know, but I'm going to guess that what we call modal share splits could be built into the city's 2030 plan. We just don't know that. We'd have to, that's an open question.
One of my comments for the traffic consultant is going to be that we talked a lot about, we're very clear on which way cars turn to go in each direction, but that's not at all clear for bikes. And so to your point, I would like to see something similar on that, but that's something that we can certainly put in again under the next item when we talk about questions that we have for staff. We can include that in there. So I would encourage you to sort of think about how to quantify or say that succinctly and put those in. Does anybody have any more questions on this list of questions or comments on this list of questions, and or is there any other group that had a meeting of the working groups and wants to update us on kind of what was discussed?
Well, just speaking since the dean is not here, and the dean and I think Pat are the Caltrain committee, the only real activity we had was to field the question from Greg and to come up with an answer on what happens to the right-of-way that might be freed up by removing the tracks. And the short answer is we just don't know, because Caltrain does own it, but what does that mean if you take the tracks off? We'd have to talk with Caltrain about it. We probably need to get the city attorney involved. We're just not competent to provide an opinion.
Thank you, Phil. I was looking at your email.
Larry?
I was going to say, does the measurable criteria group want us to approve these questions?
Sure, if we want to go through that formality, that's great. Otherwise, if there's anything that seems...
Well, I think they're all great questions, except for the first one. I don't think it's appropriate for us to ask the city council our questions, and second, the answer would be, we don't know. Yeah.
Right, so we had a lot of discussion about this one. So for those in the audience who, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but the question we had for city council is, one of the criteria is the option of fundable with feasible sources or something along those lines, each of those words being very loaded. And so the question we had was to council is what level of funding is feasible, and is there more guidance on the topic based on the city's recent tax discussions? And so basically I'm supposed to give the update to council the week of the 20th, 21st, and most likely they will not have advanced their conversations to that point. So this question could be, be something that we hold until a later date and then decide later once we have a sense of whether they're at the point of where they could give us some guidance, maybe.
I'm not going to worry about the future right now. I just want to make sure we don't ask that question now.
Okay, great. Okay, so duly noted, and I think we'll remove that. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Yes, it's a very important question. It's just a minor detail. How do we pay? Okay, anybody else have group updates that they wanted to talk about? Nope. Okay. All right, so we will submit these questions, except for the city council question, to staff and to the consultants. And so the next item is actually kind of piggybacking on that is the number 6, which is update XCAP list of questions. So Chantal, I realized the way we did it so we don't violate the Brown Act is that each of us sent our updated questions to you, but I did not get do you have then a print back for all of us to see the questions that were submitted?
Yeah, and I also thought through that, but the reason that I didn't print it out was because it seemed like it was new questions added and not actual changes to the list of questions, except for one person.
Okay.
So it was, yeah, and that was Greg. Thumbs up to you.
Mine too. I removed.
Yes, and yours I think I got today or yesterday. So.
I'm not sure if I understood it correctly because I didn't see my name on that spreadsheet, so I thought, well, I'll just put my questions in.
Yeah, so I received new questions from some XCAP members.
No,
and
the instructions were to subtract.
Yes, and 2 members did subtract. So I think, I was thinking process-wise, maybe the best today is to just kind of go through, or if there's a general sense of where you guys want to go with subtractions, or if you wanted to make changes and pass it to me, then I can go from there and update you. I'm not sure what's most efficient, but the idea for the list of questions is for staff and the consultants to follow up with you. Some of the answers will be, we don't have answers right now, that comes later in the process, but where we can answer questions, we want to. And so instead of having about 100 some questions, we wanted to see if there were more specific questions that were still relevant versus some that were really designed for the design workshop, which we never had. And so some of those questions may have been addressed by now, or some of those questions may only be relevant if we're having that sort of technical engineering conversation. So that was the idea of trying to ask for the list to be pared down so that we could respond to the questions that are most salient for your decision-making process that needs to happen between now and April.
Okay, so what I'll ask is, Chantal, then if you could still forward to all of us all the questions that were submitted, so all of us understand what all the questions are, but for the sake of discussion today, guys, I think what I was thinking was, this is an opportunity for us to think about from back in September when we were going to have a design workshop till now, and thinking forward about when we have to finally make some official recommendations. What are the areas that we haven't covered yet that this group really wants to have us dig into further? Because it will help guide both the kinds of questions that staff and other experts can answer, but also the agendas and the schedules going forward. So I know that I owe this group a sort of a calendar of what are the future meetings and what's going to be addressed at each meeting going forward. But frankly, a lot of that is driven by how much you feel like, how much of these questions have been answered, what new questions have come up for you, but most importantly, as we continue to go through this process, what is it that XCAP members feel is really missing for you to make a choice, for example, between a hybrid or a trench and a tunnel? And I understand that the new potential alternatives throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into what that is, but for the sake of right now, I'm going to ask that we try to limit it to the existing 7 alternatives, just so that we can get through some of the basics. And so I don't know if we want to go through these question by question. I see Keith has already circled a few of them, so if there's some that we think we can chop off, that would be helpful, because to Chantal's point, we really are trying to shorten, because we want to be able to give staff the ability to answer. And keep in mind that, again, the way this process works is we are going to be making recommendations for an alternative that, at least not in the case of the closure of Churchill, but in the case of the viaduct, the trench, the tunnel, all of those is for the consultants to then go and do further, deeper studies. And so there's a lot of questions that we may have had that are very technical, but that we may not ever get any answers to until we've paid extra money to get some of those answers. And so to the extent that we might not get noise and vibration specifics, what else would we need to know to be able to narrow that down? So with that, I'll let you guys start just, I don't know if we want to go down the line or whoever's got.
I could go down the line and yes or no.
Okay. There's a lot of pages of questions, Tony. Does anyone recognize their questions and can remove some now? How's that? Or are there any ones that are, as you read them, you're like, yes, this is still a burning question that I really need to have answered? So for me, I can start if that makes it easier. I still want to understand the Embarcadero, the station, at the Stanford Station discussion. So because the consultants showed that that's going to be removed, I still have questions. In fact, I eliminated a lot of questions, and the questions I submitted are very specific around that, which is, do we have any lease agreements or something that we need to know about in terms of the removal of a station? I will say that from my experience in going through the Caltrain business plan, they do not anywhere discuss the Stanford Station, which is notable for two things. One is that the Caltrain is only looking at operations, so it makes sense that they wouldn't think about the Stanford Station because they only use it a few times a year. But it's also notable because Stanford is underwriting a lot of the work that Caltrain is doing on the business plan, so you would think if that was a big deal, maybe somebody would have pointed that out. And so I don't know if there's some understanding between the city and Stanford, or Caltrain and Stanford, or PAUSD, because I did find something that PAUSD may be involved. So my questions are involved around the Stanford Station area. That's what I had.
Well, I'm not clear. I know you started out with a preamble to this, but I'm still not clear what process we're going to go through. I'm trying to count up how many questions are listed in this report. And if we have the same type of discussion as you just had, we're going to be here till about 10 o'clock tonight.
No, so I'm throwing out so the idea was, and Chantal, I realized that you sent the version of my collated one, but I think the better version to send would have been the one that was identified who turned in what question. So if we can redistribute that, then that'll make the exercise easier.
But the more I think about it, I think we need some type of preliminary cut.
Okay.
Rather than having whatever this number is, I'm guessing 75 to 100.
Well, that's what we were supposed to have. So the way.
No, well, but maybe now we have to really do it.
Okay, great.
In the sense that maybe we do the same type of process that we had with new ideas, except more forceful, that we got to turn in written ballots that say.
Yeah, because I might suggest that the questions fall in a couple categories. Something I need to know to make my decision.
Right.
Something I want other people to know so that they can make the same decision that I've already made. I think there are questions in that category. Something we already know, because I think some of these questions have been answered, and something we're not going to get the answer to, like how much money do we have?
Right.
So maybe we got volunteer or two, or we could all have homework. Because I think as Tony is and Larry's proposing, we will be here all night, just like the city council, if we go through all of these now.
Right.
We'd make them look efficient.
They might really like us if we do that.
How about something where each of these questions has to get 7 or 8 or 9 of the 13 to move forward?
I think that would take even longer.
No, not here tonight. No.
Okay.
People offline.
Oh, I think that would still be an insane amount of homework. I think the easiest thing is.
Then even more insane if we're just going to accept them then?
No. So again, the way the questions were originally presented was it was an Excel spreadsheet that had everyone's name of who turned them in. So the idea was go look up your name, figure out which questions were yours, and do you still have those questions, or do you want to cut questions out, or do you have a new question? But try to narrow them, Greg, to your point, to get you an answer, what you need to make a decision, not what you need to show others that you think some other new idea will work, right? So I think you have to be careful about that.
But are you saying, though, that once a person cuts down his or her questions, that it's going to be submitted to staff and consultant, even if it would require a lot of work and a lot of
No,
expense?
then we would review it. The idea, though, is we were going to do that tonight. So maybe
I thought
now
that's what we did.
Right. So maybe what we can do is the process section seems longer than, for example, some of the technical questions. So do we want to at least look at the technical questions, like for viaduct, and see, do we agree with the questions on the viaduct, for example, and do we want to change them? Do we feel it's been answered, or do we want to add to that? I mean, I'm open. Or we could do, there's an entire section on traffic, and since we have to give feedback on traffic, do you guys want to go through the traffic questions and see if you want to change, modify, or whatever? I mean, I'm open to suggestions. I don't have a plan here because this didn't quite work out the way I was expecting, given the way we did the homework.
Okay, just looking at the few questions, I think some of them are very obvious. We can scratch it. So
Okay.
why don't we just go through it very briefly, and then no argument, no discussion, but if it just eliminate, right?
Okay,
But if
let's try that.
somebody has a question and not comfortable eliminating, we keep it and then do the next step.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just doing traffic, or we're doing the whole thing?
Do we want to start with traffic? Is that?
But I agree with what Young said that, with all due respect, we can't have each person making a presentation like this.
Agreed. No, I'm just going to read, and then if any, I'm going to assume, how about this? Let's assume the question will be eliminated unless someone raises their hand. Yes?
Yeah.
Does that work? Sure. Okay, how about we'll take 3 minutes of reading and redlining.
On everything or just a particular section?
Well, let's start with the traffic section, because that's probably the most salient. I'm sorry this is so messy, guys, but, yeah.
And the traffic
Yeah,
questions
we're making
start on
sausage,
page
exactly.
5.
1 moment, please.
Are we going to finish by 7 o'clock, or should I call my wife and tell
I
her?
think, yeah, we're going to, because we've got to do the, what I have to say to council, and then, so we're going to take as long as we can with this, and we're going to have to do the rest offline. I mean, that's kind of the best we have with this.
All right.
The traffic section turned out to be the longest section. I'll give us 2 more minutes, and then we'll go. Okay. We're almost there. I feel like a teacher, heads are up. Okay, so
What are pulse networks?
I think that's like a node network delay kind of thing, so you can see the whole network. So Keith was asking, what is a pulse network? And my understanding is that it's sort of something that shows the entire network delays. It's some kind of traffic term. I don't really. So
It's a train term, and Europe uses it.
use your mic. And is it a pulse network?
Pulse network. It's when trains come to a station at the same time and are coordinated and scheduled that way, and that's what Europe uses as a term, pulse.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, the pulse network refers to, it can refer to when in cities like Zurich, they have a limited amount of space and they can only fit a certain amount of cars, and so they pulse the network. The traffic lights are timed to get a certain amount of people, squeeze them through at a certain amount of time. That's what I think that is, but I'm not sure. It wasn't my question, so. Okay, so cheating here, the first 4 questions were mine, so I've eliminated them, unless anybody thinks otherwise, if that's okay. The one I did think was important was what analysis can be done to study the possibility of reopening Park Boulevard to the cars for the Southgate neighborhood. So this is if Southgate was closed. If Churchill was closed and Southgate needed a different way out, could we look at what's the possibility of Park Boulevard and what would that do? Yes? Yes, thank you. Question number 5.
First 4 are gone.
First 4 are gone.
Okay.
I propose keeping 5. Anyone?
First 4 are yes.
Or a no?
Or no? Or absolutely no?
One way to do this, if assuming that people eliminated most of the questions,
Yes.
maybe people could call out the ones they would like to keep.
Right, so, yeah, that's what I meant. Oh, okay, well, just reverse your system. Okay, well, all right, let's try to get through as many as we can, because we got to leave some time for the last recap. Okay, so, sure, okay, first page first, I like that idea. So, okay, page 5. I propose keeping 5. I have 5, 8.
For 5 is 5. We really need to make that clear that 5 is for closure.
Okay.
Because if we're not closing Churchill, we really don't want to open that up because that's just going to be cut through galore.
Okay.
Why don't we take a vote on each one? Or just,
Okay, is there anyone who objects to keeping number 5? And making sure it's for closure? Okay.
I think if anybody had a question on keeping it, we should keep it, we shouldn't vote.
Okay. Next one, anybody have any others that they want to keep on this page?
I would just, yeah, I was going to say about 6, that we should just add every neighborhood that's impacted and just find out if they've all been,
Okay.
have they and how, okay?
I'm opposed to that.
Opposed to knowing?
Yeah, because I think it's in effect, that's what the city staff's job is, and they should be doing that right now. And that's why we have.
Yeah, that's why I eliminated it too. I assumed that
Isn't
we
that-
have to reach out to everybody.
Is that the point of these outreach programs? I mean, this is like,
Turn your mic on, Judy. So.
Well, we saw in the item.
Okay. Anyone else have anything other than number 5 on this page that they wanted to keep?
I had a question about 11, whether that is just opening up a design feature that would involve a tremendous amount of other work. I don't know. I don't know whose it was, but I mean, it doesn't sound wrong.
That was mine, and I'm not proposing keeping it simply because it is a design idea, but it has to do with understanding the traffic at El Camino and Embarcadero, and I figure we'll get to that when we discuss further with traffic guys, so I'm fine taking it out for now, but I think it should be part
I
of
didn't
the.
object to it. I was just wondering how much
Yeah.
Parallel work, okay.
So I'd like to observe that even though number 12 was not my question, I think it's a fairly important question. And the sooner we get the answer to something like that, that certainly might have an impact on all the mitigation discussions we're having about closing Churchill. So it'd be important to know whether or not Palo Alto can control El Camino signals.
So this concept is, because this is also my question, there are cities that have taken back control of El Camino. El Camino is actually a state road controlled by the state, so all the timing of the lights is controlled by the state. And this relates to, in the future, when we're building grade separations and we have traffic impacts on Alma during construction, people have to go elsewhere. They might have to go to El Camino, and to the extent that we could control the traffic lights, that would be super useful. So the question was, is that being considered? My understanding is it is not being considered, so we could still ask, but.
And, you know, bureaucracy being what it is, you can imagine Caltrain's people, state people saying, I'm not going to change,
Okay.
make me.
I think it's a question we ought to ask.
Okay, all right, let's keep it then.
Thank you.
For clarification, on page 5, you guys kept number 5 and number 12, correct?
So far, yes. Tony, you wanted to say something?
Just some history on that El Camino
Turn your light.
issue.
No history.
Joe Smidian had looked at an El Camino study that Caltrans funded about 15 years ago, 12 years ago. It evolved into the Trees for El Camino project. At that time, Caltrans looked at giving up El Camino
Yeah,
to the
it's part of
city, and the
this.
cities didn't want to do that.
Okay. All right, we're keeping number 12, and the report that goes to number 12 is in number 13, just for those who are curious. Okay, next page then.
I look at like 17 and 18, talking about traffic studies during construction. I think eventually we want to do that, but I think at this point it's a little premature. I think that might just cloud the water, so I would delay those.
Yeah, and those were my questions, but I'm happy to see them go in the interest of efficiency.
I was asking Carrie about number 24. I'm not a school mom anymore. I don't know what that's referring to, all the school meals or. I couldn't figure that out.
So there was someone from PAUSD who came and spoke about the meals being delivered. So there's apparently a lot of trucks that come into 25 Churchill and the backside of Pali and those trucks go over Churchill. So they would now have to go, right, it's a big hub there. So it's the bus depot and where all of the district, like food for Pali gets delivered. And so there was a number of delivery trucks that they talked about. But my understanding is that the school is now in consultation with the city staff, so my assumption is that that's being considered.
And in the spirit of what Keith just said, we can also drop 34 and 35.
Okay, yeah.
I'm interested in keeping 29 and 30. I think it directly relates to questions we have for measurable criteria. And we got some answers about cycle tracks and such, but I think we should continue those conversations with staff.
Okay.
I would like to keep number 18, which is construction delays.
Microphone.
I would like to keep number 18 so we can measure what construction delays impact our decisions, how construction delays might impact our decisions.
But this doesn't specify what kind of construction.
And they're going to
during-
just tell you they don't know until you first pick an alternative, then study it for 2 years, then tell you what the delays would be, then tell you what the construction delays would be
Right.
on Alma. So I think what I'm saying is you're going to wait. The answer is going to be we can't know at this time. Period.
I'm okay with that, as long as some time.
But then we should take it out because you're not going to get an answer. This is questions that we want answered that will get an answer, not that they're going to tell you it ain't coming.
And there's some
You
that
would get an
we move
answer.
over
The
for
answer would
later.
just be, we can't answer it right now.
Right. Are you okay with that, Tony?
I'd like to know what they.
Okay, if you want to keep it, we can keep it. Tony's number.
Thank you, Tony. Okay.
You want to vote? Okay, how many people are in favor of keeping the question, which is, what are the increased delays on traffic for Alma during construction and for how long? Okay, you got 4. No, Larry wants to really vote. I'm okay keeping it, Larry. Let them say it's not going to be.
Well, then you vote that way. All these questions.
Okay.
Do you don't want to have vote the vote? No, I'm just saying that when we go forward with the question, we're spending the city's money, and I don't think we ought to do that lightly. And so, if a majority or 2/3 really want to go forward,
Right.
I'm very comfortable with that. But if it's just one person, no.
I also want to know, I asked a similar question, but to Larry's point, we're not in a position where this is answerable, and we have 18 minutes left. We need to move on.
Yeah.
I don't know how you decide on an alternative without knowing all of the impacts of that alternative. And so that's the reason why I'd like to know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can we just table that and come back in 2 months?
Yeah.
And
Okay, great. Okay, so on this page so far, Chantal, I have 29 and 30. Dave?
I was just curious about what this group thought of the state of traffic modeling for South Palo Alto, because we haven't really talked much about that, and that's sort of about number 16, I think.
So I guess the question is, would the choice of an alternative for you be impacted by understanding, not counting new alternatives that have been proposed? Is the choice between a viaduct or a hybrid or a trench or a tunnel impacted by South Palo Alto traffic studies?
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
I think the answer would be probably no.
Right, I don't know that it would change the answer, I guess.
I think they're so similar that there's other issues that
Turn your mic on.
they're so similar that there's other issues that are going to override that. So I'd say we table that also.
Yeah, I would agree.
In general, just talking about the bike and pedestrian, so like 36.
Yeah, I have that one too.
I'm not sure if that's a discriminator. Do we want to have that data? It kind of seems like a nice to know to me. I'm not sure if that's going to be a discriminator in the ideas, but we really have not been paying enough attention to bikes and peds, I think.
So I think I asked that question, and I think it's helpful to know. We may already have that information. We may not have to ask the consultants. I think I asked it early on, so I wasn't sure what we already knew. But yeah, my sense at the time I asked the question was that we had really thoroughly studied the Churchill bike pedestrian situation, but maybe not as thoroughly at Meadow and Charleston, where the other high school is having bike crossing. So I wanted to make sure just to elevate that. If we already have the answer, we can strike it, but if we don't, we should know.
So I think the one outstanding question, which I think is also on the other page, is could you close Meadow? And the traffic study said, no, you can't. And that's what Hexagon also said, is no, you can't. So in my mind, that was maybe the deciding factor in thinking about, well, how do you decide between a hybrid or this or that? Like, would you have to consider a closure there? And since the answer is no, I think anything related to bike peds on all the 4 alternatives in the south are going to have to be included because that's part of the city's mantra. So I'm okay not including that if that jives with everyone.
I would like to keep it. Thank you.
Number 36, you want to keep?
Yes, me too.
Okay. All right, how many people want to keep 36? We're going to, okay, lots of people want to keep it, so let's keep it. Great. Okay, so that means we have 29, 30, and 36 on this page. Anybody else?
I think
It was 24?
We didn't just have any discussion.
Oh, sorry, did I highlight the wrong number? No, it was part of these are questions on things that we already discussed with the traffic thing.
I want to observe that, just watching the kids get dropped off.
Oh, you're making 29 and 30 the same thing as 36.
They're sort of all connected
Yeah.
in some ways.
Okay.
So for clarification, 24 was not something you guys wanted to keep? I think Judy brought that one up. What is it? Oh, got it, okay. So 29, 30, 36 is what you have on page 6.
That's what I have, yep. Is that okay? 36. All right, next page, we're almost there.
I propose striking 37, 38, 41, 42, and 44.
I'm going to assume all strikes unless somebody calls out something that they want. How's that? So,
I think we know the answer of 39, for example. it's going to be big enough for all those vehicles. So
Right.
we can strike that.
I think that the purpose of asking that questions, and again, some of these are my newbie questions, was are they allowed to use Meadow? Like, I'm seeing these buses on all sorts of like neighborhood streets, so I didn't know.
Okay.
But we're planning for it, and I want to make sure they're allowed to use it if we're going to plan for it.
So we have 10 minutes, and I still got to go through the city council thing, so is there anybody who has a burning
I'd
question?
actually like to add a question. I don't want to keep any of these questions, but I would like to ask that we redo the traffic study for today with more trains. I want to
Okay.
make sure that
More
question
trains.
gets to.
How many, when you say more?
However many Nadia thinks we should do.
Thanks. So he's saying he wants to add a question about could we do the traffic study with more trains? So why don't we make that as part of the comments that we'll have on the traffic
Okay,
thing?
great.
And I think.
I just want to make sure that that gets recorded and someone does it.
Thank you, yes, I hear you. And we could talk more about
Can
that.
we ask for the word not to be redo, but potentially just to modify it to?
Expand, yeah,
You're going to change the parameter in the computer and you're going to press return.
right.
But when you say more, I think you need to be specific. More could be.
Just a clarifying question. During the course of all of our meetings, people have raised questions, and so these are not the only questions.
For
right?
sure.
Okay, I want to be
Yes.
sure.
No,
Otherwise, I'm going to start
this is
to-
just, what does XCAP need to know? Because part of this guides, like, what do I need to schedule at a future meeting to make sure we get these issues addressed, so we get an answer that we're all okay with, so we can make a decision eventually.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the rest of the homework, and you guys do have homework, and let's try to get the homework done this time.
Where are we then, 37 to 47?
Oh, I just said, if there's any, does anybody have any of these on this page? Sorry, did I move too quickly? So,
Yeah.
all right, go ahead, sorry.
No, Carrie wanted to have almost all of them, I think.
No, she wanted to strike them all.
Oh, strike them all.
Is that what I heard?
Remember, our original instruction was to find what we didn't want, so I was trying to save people time. I'm sorry for the confusion.
Okay, so sorry, but just to clarify, you do not want those in the record, or you do want those?
No.
Okay, no, she wants to strike them.
So we're striking all of them?
Yeah,
on
so
7?
I don't have any on page 7. Does anyone have any on page 7 other than the one that Greg added? No, it's okay.
About maximum number of trains?
Larry, do you have any? Nope, okay.
47, is that?
47?
47, is that something that we wanted, just more detail about the traffic study itself, or is that?
Yeah, and does anyone recognize this question? Because I'm worried it's also someone who's not present. It might have been Adina, who knows more about traffic-y stuff, and so.
This sounds like a traffic operations question.
Yeah.
Use your mic. Sorry.
It sounds like traffic operations.
Mm-hmm.
That is, do I want to like signalize in a way that I create a pulse network as opposed to on-demand signals where things get random? I think this is way too detailed
Okay.
for our current situation.
Okay. All right, so,
I mean, one of the things I do want to see is like some of these tight intersections having more detail of how he came up with his answer.
okay. So we can keep those as our comments for traffic, right? Is that okay? Yep.
And I'm looking at the notes. The Pulse Network question came just based off of XCAP discussion at your September 5th meeting. So it wasn't
Okay.
a particular person. noted.
Okay, so again, the exercise for everyone to go through is eliminate as many questions as you can and really hone in on the questions that you have as of now that you're going to need to make a decision going forward. And you should turn those, so you have to submit them to Chantal. But what I'll ask is, we'll put a deadline on this, so if we could have it, we have a meeting next week. And so ideally, you will have these to Chantal by tomorrow afternoon or Friday or Saturday. I'm looking at Chantal for some guidance here.
Just talk loud.
None of them
We can
are
hear
on.
you. Just talk loud.
Staff's not allowed to speak, clearly.
I'll have the notice next week's meeting. I'll probably do the notice tomorrow.
Right.
For that meeting, and so I can get the materials out for next week's meeting on Monday.
Okay.
Yeah, so anytime before Monday, and then I'll have it.
Okay, so before Monday, so you guys have until
Friday?
Sunday night.
It's fine. Friday, we're not here, so
Yeah.
yeah, you can send it to me, and then I'll compile everything on Monday.
And
I have a question. So when we discuss about the truck route, those people has concern about the Kingsley, is there a way to like not have a truck pass that route?
That's a great question that maybe our traffic person.
It's a traffic question, right?
So we can designate the truck routes if that's what your question
Yeah.
is. Yes.
Because it's dangerous, they feel uncomfortable, then truck goes a different way.
Right.
Yeah, we designate truck routes, but you also have to actually have routes for trucks. So that's
Yeah, well,
something
they
that
can
we
go
have to
through
think
Embarcadero,
about.
Middlefield, I don't know, and Camino, they can go wherever they want. They don't have to cut that tight corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Megan
Can
had
we
a
add that question here?
Megan had a comment, which I agree with, is that we're going to have 3 meetings this month, and we have a lot to do, so I understand why we want 3 meetings, but when they start at 4 o'clock, that's really hard for people who have to work,
Yeah.
especially Megan comes from the city, so that's even more. Can we bump it up to start at 5?
Can we, so would Judy and Carrie and guys, would it be okay to start at 5 o'clock on this Wednesday, this coming Wednesday? Would it be better for everyone to start at 5? Oh, yeah. Oh. Tell them we said hi.
Yeah, I can't be here before.
Okay. For the,
I'm sorry, you're saying start it at 5 instead of 4?
yes.
But is it still a 3-hour meeting?
Well, let's try for 2.
Because I'll have to leave after 2.
Okay. No, we're going to try for 2 hours, and so let's see how much we can get done. We don't have our speaker, so Sebastian Petty is hopefully coming at some of the meetings afterwards, and we're waiting to hear.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I did want to clarify if we're doing the 22nd or the 29th so that I can put that on your calendar.
Well,
I
we're
think it was,
waiting for Sebastian, right?
yes, I think he said, I'm looking right now.
So our speaker
Give me a
is-
second.
Yeah, our speaker is Sebastian Petty from Caltrain, so we're just deciding if we're going to have the 22nd or the 29th based on that meeting. So while Chantal's looking that up, I'll move to the next item, which is just basically, I will be giving an update to City Council on the 21st. Is it the 21st? It's a weird dated meeting.
21st. MLK Day is Monday, the 20th, so it's the special meeting on Tuesday, the 21st.
Okay. So the update that I will be giving them is basically just recapping what we've done. And so what we've done, just so you recall, is we heard new ideas, we voted on those, we went through the threshold, and then we're recommending 3 ideas to go forward. So I will be explaining that process, and then I will be giving, or actually maybe Keith is going to be giving, hopefully for me, a technical conceptual view of the 3 ideas, so that council will then be deciding whether or not they want to move forward with any of those ideas and spend more money on getting some experts to look at those. We voted not to include the question that we have for city council, so outside of that, I would just be updating them that that's what we've done to date and that we're continuing to proceed. Is everyone okay with that? Is there anybody who thinks that we should be telling or asking council anything more very pressing? Tony, use your mic.
So I've sort of been wondering about this cost issue, and it seems like the public sector costs are about 40% more, 30 to 40% more, and on $1 billion, that's 300 million. And I'm wondering whether that's an important issue, or is it, when I talk to people who work in this public sector, they roll their eyes and say, yeah, that's how it is. But it's a big number, and should we look at how we can look at other delivery methods to save $300 million on $1 billion?
As a resident, I'd love to help. As a ex-cap chair, I'm going to say that we have already our role defined, and I don't think our role is to figure out what construction methods or what we can do to reduce cost overloads, because we just don't have time or expertise, frankly, in that. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
But I think after the decision's made, that's something that we should be pursuing. But I think it's not a discriminator between the different options.
But if I can, really quickly, I think it'd be great if we could save the city a ton of money finding some new type of method for delivering these projects. But I just want to point out that a lot of what adds to the cost or drives the cost are federal laws and regulations. So we're not going to be able to get around those. Like, for instance, when we buy our steel, it's going to be American-made steel because we have to do Buy America. So it's some of those things that make things a little bit more expensive. We can't just buy steel from China. Maybe we don't want to, but we can't buy steel from China.
Put your light on, Phil.
It's not the construction cost. We're talking about the overhead, the engineering supervision overhead. So why can private industry do this for 8% of bid costs, whereas public projects cost like 36%.
But it's-
I think those are the numbers AECOM gave us.
Yeah.
That's nothing with the price of steel of China, the price of tea in China.
But it's outside of the scope of what we can do, right?
What?
So it's outside of the scope of what we can do on this committee.
Probably,
Yeah,
but we should clarify the point.
yeah.
To cut the overhead.
Yeah, I have a question. So those three studies, the additional studies, how are we going to decide
Which additional study, sorry?
the Meadow and Churchill,
Uh-huh.
close, what's the status on that? And also, if we're going to consider how, what's a future plan for the consideration?
No, wait, I'm sorry, I think I don't understand your question.
Yeah, so the Churchill, option, like additional option, and the Meadow roundabout, 2 roundabouts, those are 3.
Oh, that's Elizabeth's idea, you mean?
Yeah.
So that we have to wait until city council, if city council decides that those options warrant further study, then we'll have to see how that then feeds into our process. But as of right now, we don't have anything on those.
So you already had a meeting with them, and then you already made?
No, that's so I'm going to
it's
city
gonna keep
council.
happening.
Yeah, that's what's coming up. So I will give them the update, and that night, Keith will try to present at a high level, and Tony and Elizabeth and Mike Price will be available to answer any technical questions. And then the city council will deliberate, and then they will decide whether or not they want to move forward on any of those ideas. And if they do, then it'll have to be explained to us what happens, because I'm not really clear. To be
All right.
honest.
And we'll have a staff analysis that accompanies that report.
Right, yeah, so there'll be my presentation, but then there's also going to be a staff report that will include essentially the comments that AECOM had on those, and any other technical stuff that and they're going to try to put an estimate on what the cost would be to do further study on those items. Not what each alternative would cost, but what it would cost to study them further. Okay? Okay, so Chantal, I'll leave the last 5 minutes for you for an update and for Sebastian information.
Yes, so the Sebastian information I have is he can come on the 22nd or the 29th. And I think based off the doodle for everyone, the 29th was a better date than the 22nd.
Okay.
So
I think
for an additional January XCAP meeting.
I think that let's do the 29th because we already have 2 back-to-back meetings now. That'll give us a
you
break
2
at least
weeks.
1 week. Does that work? The 29th? This is for the Caltrain
Wednesday,
meeting.
the 29th, and would that be a 4 o'clock or a 5 o'clock start?
I'd say 4 o'clock. I think that one might be a longer meeting because we're going to have lots of folks with questions, right?
Okay, so I will schedule Sebastian Petty from Caltrain for January 29th as a special XCAP meeting
Great.
at 4. And then the other thing, Philip wanted to just give a 1-minute update about the Dumbarton Corridor meeting he went to today.
Yeah, well, that's really about it. I went to the San Mateo County Transit District board meeting today, and they gave a brief presentation on the Dumbarton Rail Corridor project.
Oh, yeah.
And the key things that I took away from it was, number one, that the FTA is really invested in this, and that's pretty significant because they're attending like meetings on an ongoing basis. They're actually having monthly meetings with them, which is kind of unusual for a project this early in its state. So that was kind of interesting. They also talked about the different transit modes that they're considering, which include regional rail, light rail, and also an automated rubber tire vehicle, which would be like an automated bus or people mover. And they've got a new agency that's essentially leading this. It's called Cross Bay Transit Partners. So that's about it.
Is that the same as the Facebook plenary group?
It is,
thing?
yes. That's the Facebook and Plenary Group collaboration formed a new corporation, essentially. Or
Okay.
company, or I'm not exactly sure.
And
When you say they, like the FTA is meeting with them, who's them?
Yeah, with the CBTP, which is the Cross Bay Transit Partners, yes. And ongoing meetings that they're having with other partners.
Philip, do you have any update for us on BTA?
No.
And Measure B stuff?
Not at this time.
Okay. Okay. Anybody have anything else?
Are we going to have a chance to review, there are all the community conversations coming up. I'm not sure who's presenting, but are we going to have a chance to see what the story is we're going to tell the community?
Yeah, we will put that on the XCAP agendas like we've done in the past. And I think the first one is later February.
Yeah.
It'll mostly be for the town halls, not the word on the street.
I think
'cause
there's something January 30th.
So,
Yeah, but yes, we will try to bring something before that. And the word on the street are informal conversations, so we probably wouldn't have like something to show you for that. But the town hall meetings will be set up sort of like the larger community meetings we've done in the past, so some type of presentation, and we'll bring that to the.
I'm just worried that the informal communication could get very confusing depending on what we tell people and in what order.
Well,
Most people don't know what's going on here.
I was under the impression that now that XCAP has sort of an official role, that we are no longer in the business of having to do the outreach nor screen all of the outreach stuff, because that's what the new communications person that we hired is doing.
I'm sorry, but just really quickly, because I'm going to be hosting the Word on the Street thing. It's not intended to really give out information. It's more intended to listen to people, to hear comments. So we're going to be collecting comments and all that. And it's not focused on rail separation. It's focused on all transportation. But we're expecting that we're going to hear comments about rails and grade separation. So that's the reason why it's included in this.
I understand.
Thanks.
But yeah, and then to the other point, it's just helpful to still get feedback from the XCAP, but like the last time for November 7th, it was something you guys quickly looked at, so that's something that would be helpful in the future for other materials as well.
Okay, and if there are XCAP members who feel like they really would like to give more detailed feedback, so we don't have to spend much of our meeting time on that, what I would propose is if there's a subset working group that would be interested in really kind of helping them with their graphics and helping them with their outreach, and specifically maybe even for the business community, right? Yeah, could we help give them, yeah. So, but if I can get a show of hands, if there's any group that would like to kind of work more closely with, that would volunteer to work more closely with staff on that, and that's their interest, you could either tell me now or tell me after the meeting. You know, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, actually.
But I can tell you right now that the only business community that has not had any outreach is Embarcadero Road and Town and Country. And so until we approach the businesses there, we don't have, as far as I know, if I'm wrong, tell me, you've reached out to Town and Country?
No, we were planning to work through you. That was our agreement a while ago. We were just going to set up a daytime business meeting, and so we can follow up with you to still do that.
Okay, well, I'll work with you on that, but I think, you know, we're all busy designing this and not talking about construction impacts, delays of traffic, people, what's the impact on the businesses when people aren't even going to go to Town and Country, they'll avoid it for 2 years while you're doing, I mean, I just think it's important for us to know that, so.
Great.
Phil, I'm confused. Your statement that this all transportation, I look at the handout we got tonight, and for these 6 meetings, the title is Connecting Palo Alto, Rail Crossing Community Conversations. So that doesn't look to me like all forms of transportation.
Yeah, so if you read, it's the bottom 3 meetings that I'm referencing, and it says informal open house style community conversations with city staff regarding transportation projects, including rail.
Right, and that seemingly applies to only the last 3.
I will just note that it'll be, if people are going to read the headline, they might not see your one-liner, and so you may get a lot more rail people.
Or fold it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the pain of that already.
Well, since we now have a different understanding, I think, or maybe we don't, but if you're going to stay with rail crossing community conversations, join the rail conversation as your headlines, I think we should have some input from this group. We've deliberately stayed out of it up to now, and I think now is the time for us to really be more active in the presentations and the conversations with the public.
Sorry, so Larry, are you saying that you would want to be involved in the town halls or the word on the street, or both? Or?
Well, I think it's confusing to have, if these are supposed to be 2 different types of meetings, it's confusing to have them on the same sheet of paper.
Yeah, I believe our communications officer put these on the same sheet of paper, even though they weren't, the word on the street wasn't directly a rail conversation or only a rail conversation, but because of the expectation that due to timing and locations, that we would get comments and feedback regarding rail on these.
I think speaking as someone who knows that, for example, there's parking issues in my neighborhood, you should be similarly marketing this as the parking conversations on the street and the, pick your Crescent Park conversations on the street, because otherwise this seems to only indicate rail.
That was the original hope, that it would be a broad transportation conversation.
Can you fix the graphics so there is no confusion?
Yeah, I'll talk to the communications officer on that. Thanks.
And is the expectation that XCAP is to attend these town halls? Who's going to these town halls besides the public?
I'd like to go.
Phil's going.
Phil's going. I'm duly noted. But I'm saying,
If I get a ride.
all council, is
Yeah,
XCAP
it's-
supposed to be there?
I would view it similarly to how we've done the community meetings in the past, where XCAP members can come, council members can come. It's not a formal meeting for either body, so you don't have to call it to order. It's not, you need a quorum or anything like that. No actions will be taken. But it's an opportunity for us to present the updates on where we are, as well as get feedback from the community. And we tried to pick locations that were, for the town halls, we tried to pick locations that were near some of the crossings intentionally to focus the conversation where we could on those. The first one is a general update for anyone who hasn't been up to speed, and then the next two are specific about Meadow Charleston and then Churchill.
So the previous consultants, when they did some of these community meetings, there were these thick reports that came afterwards, which was like, here's the summary of all the comments that were submitted, here's everything that everyone wrote down. When they did those like push button surveys, there was a response of the surveys. Is something similar going to happen after each of these town hall meetings? And could XCAP expect that we eventually get some sort of formal synopsis report that just says this many people came, these were the written comments that were turned in, or?
I think it'll be similar to what Eileen Goodwin with Apex has put together for the community meeting. So she usually has a summary of the high-level things and the things we've heard at the different stations at the community meetings. And I think she puts the number of people in there. And then Megan, our communications officer, has also been doing the blog series. And so we usually have some sort of follow-up for those that weren't able to come if they wanted to still give us input afterwards. So we've received some input after the November 7th community meeting as an example.
And there was a mention of surveys. Are we going to get reports back about the surveys?
I will update you at our next meeting.
And so I understand that you tried to find a location in the northern part of Palo Alto for one of these community conversations, is that right? And you just couldn't find any place to have one in the next 4 or 5 months?
I'm only looking a little perplexed because we wanted to do Churchill, near Churchill. So we're at Palo Alto High School, and that's as far north of a crossing that we're actually discussing.
I'm sorry, I was talking about the word on the street. Maybe I just ask.
So for word
For
on
these
the
larger conversations?
So this is another situation where this is just looped into this flyer because of the connection to the connecting Palo Alto and the timing, but this is intended to be an ongoing series of conversations that I want to have throughout the city.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Good clarification question. Sorry for my confusing face. I'm like, is there a crossing north of Churchill that we're doing right now? Exactly.
I agree. Thanks.
Very good feedback. This is why we want your feedback before we take materials to the public.
I'm just trying to limit our homework. All right, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.